Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. What if the artifacts we preserve are preserving something of us in return? The Metropolitan Museum of Ancient History stood like a mausoleum against the twilight sky, its neoclassical facade bathed in the amber glow of floodlights. I checked my watch, 9:35, and clutched my security badge tighter. The night shift wasn't something I volunteered for, but as the newest curator in the Ancient Artifacts Division, I didn't have much choice. Just a standard inventory check, Dr. Reynolds, Director Harlow had said, his voice carrying that aristocratic inflection that made everything sound like a favor rather than an order. The board wants confirmation that everything's in place before the new Mesopotamian exhibit opens. My footsteps echoed through the marble corridor as I made my way toward the east wing. Most museums felt different after hours, quieter, perhaps more reverent, but this one felt watchful. I'd worked in museums for 8 years, but never one quite like this. The Metropolitan housed artifacts dating back to the earliest human civilizations, pieces so rare and unusual that some had never been displayed publicly. Something skittered across the floor ahead of me, probably a mouse. The building was over 100 years old. No amount of maintenance could keep the occasional rodent from finding its way in. Still, I felt my heart quicken. The sound had seemed deliberate somehow. I reached the security panel outside the ancient Mesopotamian collection and swiped my card. The light turned green and the heavy door clicked open. The exhibit hall was dimly lit by security lights, casting long shadows between display cases. My job was simple: check each artifact against the digital inventory to ensure nothing was missing or misplaced before the grand opening. As I moved deeper into the gallery, the air grew noticeably colder. I pulled my cardigan tighter, making a mental note to speak with maintenance about the climate controls. Preservation required constant temperature and humidity, and fluctuations could damage irreplaceable artifacts. The central display housed the collection's crown jewel, a ceremonial mask allegedly belonging to a high priest of Nergal, the Mesopotamian god of plague and war. Carved from obsidian with inlaid lapis lazuli, it had been discovered in an unmarked chamber beneath the ruins of ancient Kutha. The museum had acquired it through a private collector whose identity remained confidential. I approached the case, clipboard in hand, when a faint sound caught my attention, a rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass. I turned, scanning the room, but saw nothing. The sound stopped. Museum acoustics could play tricks on the ears. Sound bounced off marble floors and high ceilings in unpredictable ways. Returning to my task, I noticed something odd about the mask. According to the catalog, it should have been positioned facing east, but it now faced north. I checked the reference photo on my tablet against the current display. Something wasn't right. Hello? My voice sounded smaller than intended. Security? Is someone in here? No response, just the faint hum of the climate control system. I leaned closer to the display case, examining the mask. The obsidian surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The eye holes were particularly disturbing, deep and hollow, yet somehow not empty. A detail I hadn't noticed before caught my attention: tiny inscriptions around the edge, so fine they were nearly invisible. As I peered at them, a movement reflected in the glass made me jump. Something had shifted behind me, a human shape. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. just shadows and still artifacts. I turned back to the mask, and my breath caught in my throat. It had moved again. Now it faced directly toward me. The tapping sound returned, louder this time, no longer just fingernails but hands pressing against glass. Not from one direction, but from every display case in the room. The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me. The lights flickered once, twice, and then stabilized, but dimmer than before. My tablet chimed with a notification, a text from security, Dr. Reynolds, motion sensors triggered in the West Wing. Are you conducting inventory there as well? I hadn't been anywhere near the West Wing. As I typed my response with trembling fingers, the mask's display case began to fog from the inside. Condensation shouldn't be possible in a hermetically sealed environment. I watched, paralyzed, as a single word appeared, traced by an invisible finger in the mist. Mine. The security lights failed completely, plunging the gallery into darkness. In the pitch black, I heard something that turned my blood to ice, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the gallery in a sickly yellow glow. Shards of glass littered the floor around the mask's display case. The obsidian artifact itself lay face up on the marble, intact and gleaming. No alarm had sounded. That was impossible. The security system should have triggered instantly. Think rationally, I whispered to myself, voice trembling. There's a logical explanation. My scientific mind scrambled for answers. Pressure changes in the climate control system could have shattered the glass. The mask could have been improperly secured, causing it to shift positions. The word in the condensation? A trick of light and shadow. But none of these explanations accounted for the bone-deep dread seeping through me, or why every instinct screamed to run. I approached the mask cautiously, protocol warring with fear. Museum procedure dictated that I document the situation and secure the artifact, but something primal warned against touching it. Kneeling beside the mask, I noticed something peculiar. No glass had fallen on or around it, as if the shards had deliberately avoided it. The obsidian surface seemed to pulse with subtle light, like a heartbeat. The inscriptions I noticed earlier were more pronounced now, seeming to writhe across the surface. I reached for my phone to photograph them for translation, but my hand froze mid-motion. The eye holes of the mask no longer appeared empty. Something moved within their depths, something that watched me with ancient awareness. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Dr. Reynolds? The security guard's voice was distorted by static. Cameras show you standing still. Everything okay? I reached for the radio, but words failed me as the mask on the floor slowly began to rotate, turning toward my feet without any physical force moving it. Yes, no, I stammered. The Mesopotamian mask display case has been breached. No signs of intrusion. I need assistance. Only static answered. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor into my bones. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. The other artifacts in their cases seemed to tremble in response. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill. I needed to secure the mask and leave immediately. Fighting against my better judgment, I removed my jacket and carefully reached to wrap it around the artifact without touching it directly. As the fabric made contact with the obsidian surface, a jolt like electricity shot up my arm. Images flashed through my mind, a temple of black stone, figures in robes surrounding an altar, a sacrifice with a blade of dark metal. The smell of copper and incense filled my nostrils. I gasped and pulled back, but it was too late. The connection had been made. The mask had shown me something, or taken something from me. My jacket now lay flat on the floor, the mask nowhere to be seen. Rising unsteadily to my feet, I scanned the room. All the display cases now stood empty, their contents vanished without a trace. The gallery, familiar just hours ago, had subtly changed. The walls seemed farther apart, the ceiling higher. Shadows gathered in corners where no shadows should exist. A soft scratching sound drew my attention to the far wall, where an ancient stone tablet hung. The cuneiform markings on its surface were moving, rearranging themselves like insects. They formed words in English before my eyes. "We have waited for one who can see." My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number, "Don't look behind the masks." But I already had. And something had looked back. The gallery door through which I'd entered was now gone, replaced by a solid wall. The only exit was an archway at the far end that hadn't existed before, an archway that led into darkness. The lights began to fail again, one by one, each bulb popping with a sound like small bones breaking. Darkness crept toward me from all sides. In that moment, I made a choice driven by desperation. I ran toward the mysterious archway. As the last light died, plunging the gallery into absolute darkness, I felt the temperature drop further. Something brushed against my cheek, cold and dry, like ancient parchment. The archway loomed before me, revealing not another gallery but a stone corridor that couldn't possibly exist within the museum's architecture. Torches mounted on walls of rough-hewn stone provided flickering illumination. The air smelled of dust and time. Behind me, something moved in the darkness of the gallery. Not footsteps, but a sound like dragging cloth across stone. I stepped through the archway. The world tilted. Gravity seemed to shift. I fell forward, stumbling onto my hands and knees on the stone floor. When I looked back, the museum gallery was gone. Only a solid wall remained. The torches along the corridor dimmed momentarily, as if responding to an unseen breath. In the brief near darkness, I glimpsed shapes moving within the walls themselves, faces pressing outward against the stone as if trapped within it, mouths open in silent screams. When the light returned, the walls were solid once more. My radio crackled again, the voice now distorted beyond recognition, speaking words that weren't quite English, wasn't quite any language I recognized. Between the bursts of static, I made out a single phrase that chilled me more thoroughly than the frigid air. "The masks are not the artifacts. You are." The corridor stretched before me, impossibly long and ancient. My rational mind struggled to reconcile what I was experiencing with what should be possible. The Metropolitan Museum had been built in 1914. This passage looked millennia older, with walls of fitted stone blocks bearing carvings no archaeologist had documented. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice echoing strangely. Hallucination. Gas leak, maybe. But the stone was cold and solid beneath my fingertips as I steadied myself against the wall. A gas-induced hallucination wouldn't feel so tangible, wouldn't carry the distinct smell of mineral-laden earth and ancient decay. The torches flickered in a breeze I couldn't feel. Ahead, the corridor widened into a circular chamber with 7 identical doorways. At the center stood a stone pedestal on which familiar obsidian gleamed, the mask. I approached cautiously, every instinct warning me to turn back, though to what, I couldn't say. The museum floor plan I'd memorized during orientation showed nothing below the east wing but foundation and utility tunnels. These elaborate chambers couldn't exist. The mask lay face up on the pedestal, as if waiting. The inscriptions along its edge now glowed with a faint blue luminescence. My academic curiosity battled with growing terror. Those markings weren't just decorative. They resembled cuneiform but were older, more primitive. "What are you?" I whispered. "What are you?" The words echoed back, not from the walls but inside my mind, like a thought that wasn't my own. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd studied ancient artifacts for years, documented their history, cataloged their significance. Never had I felt one studying me in return. The chamber began to change. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with slow, deliberate rhythm. The torchlight revealed details previously hidden. The stone surfaces were covered in life-sized human figures, not carved but somehow pressed into the rock, as if the stone had once been soft enough to receive their impression. Their faces expressed terror. I backed away from the pedestal, only to feel something solid behind me. Spinning around, I found myself facing a figure in elaborate robes of a style I recognized from Sumerian depictions of high priests. But where a head should have been, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to draw in light. "Who?" The question died in my throat as the figure raised a hand. Its skin was covered in the same inscriptions that decorated the mask. "Keeper," it spoke, the voice neither male nor female but ancient beyond measure. "We have waited." I don't, my scholarly composure shattered completely. "What is this place?" "The true archive," the figure replied. "What your kind sees above is merely shadow." "My kind?" "The forgetting ones. Brief flames." The figure moved closer. Where its face should be, I could now discern a suggestion of features, like a face seen through black water. "You touch our vessels, display our containers, never knowing they are doors." My mind raced through everything I knew about Mesopotamian mythology. Nergal, god of the underworld, plague, and war. His priests were said to communicate with the dead. The mask, I managed. "It belonged to your order?" "Belonged?" The figure's laugh was like stone grinding against stone. "It is a key, and you have turned it." The room began to spin slowly, the walls moving while the floor remained still. The figures pressed into the stone walls began to emerge, their forms becoming three-dimensional, limbs extracting from rock with the sound of cracking marble. My breath came in short gasps. The temperature continued to drop until each exhale produced a cloud of white vapor. I reached for my phone, no signal, no connection to the world I knew. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, summoning what courage remained. "To remember." The figure gestured to the 7 doorways. Knowledge was not meant to be separated from experience. Your museums are graveyards where meaning goes to die. The headless priest moved toward the mask on the pedestal. "This vessel has tasted you now. It knows your fear, your curiosity. Most suitable." With horrifying clarity, I finally understood. The mask hadn't been displayed in the museum, it had been imprisoned there. And I had released it. "The others before you were unworthy," the figure continued. "They could not see. They could not hear. But your mind opened to us." The emerging figures from the walls had nearly freed themselves, their stone limbs cracking and bending into human form. Their faces remained frozen in expressions of horror. "They were like you once," the headless priest said, following my gaze. "Seekers who found. Now they serve as memory." One of the stone figures broke entirely free from the wall. It stumbled forward with jerky movements, dust cascading from its joints. Its surface began to change, stone becoming something else, not quite flesh, but no longer rock. Features shifted, becoming more defined, more familiar. It was transforming into me. I backed toward one of the 7 doorways, no destination in mind except away. You cannot leave the archive now, the priest said. The key has turned. The mask on the pedestal rose into the air, hovering before rotating to face me. The empty eye holes now filled with the same darkness that occupied the space where the priest's head should be. Every artifact needs a keeper, the priest intoned. Every story needs a teller. The mask flew toward me with impossible speed. I ducked, stumbling through the nearest doorway as the obsidian artifact whispered past my ear. Beyond the threshold lay not another stone passage but a modern hallway, the administrative section of the museum. Hope surged through me as I ran, the sound of my footsteps changing from echoes on stone to muffled thuds on carpet. Behind me, something scraped against the wall, the sound of stone dragging across plaster. I didn't look back. The fluorescent lights of the administrative hallway flickered erratically, casting strobing shadows that made movement difficult to track. I sprinted past framed photographs of museum benefactors, their glass coverings reflecting my panicked expression back at me, except sometimes the reflection wasn't mine at all, but a stone face with my features. My breath came in ragged gasps as I rounded the corner toward the security office. Help. I needed help. Hello? Security? I called out, my voice raw and desperate. The hallway stretched impossibly before me, doubling in length even as I ran. The doors along its sides began to warp, their rectangular shapes becoming uneven, the wood grain shifting into patterns that resembled screaming faces. I skidded to a halt as I realized something fundamental had changed. The museum's layout had been altered, or perhaps it had always been this way, and I simply hadn't been able to see it before. The nearest door bore a nameplate, Artifact Processing. I'd been in that room dozens of times, cataloging new acquisitions. It should lead to a well-lit workspace with examination tables and equipment. I yanked it open. Beyond lay a vast chamber hewn from black stone, illuminated by bowls of blue fire. Robed figures surrounded a central altar where something writhed and screamed. The smell of blood and incense assaulted my senses. I slammed the door shut, heart threatening to burst from my chest. This isn't real, I whispered, pressing my back against the wall. This can't be real. A janitor's cart stood further down the hall, abandoned mid-task. The mundane sight of mops and cleaning supplies anchored me momentarily to reality. I moved toward it, desperate for anything normal. As I approached, the reflection in its metal surface shifted. Instead of my face, I saw the headless priest, darkness swirling where features should be. Keeper, the reflection spoke, though I heard it inside my mind. Why do you flee what you have sought all your life? I never sought this, I gasped. Every artifact you touched was once alive, the voice continued. Every piece you cataloged was part of someone's truth. Did you think history was merely objects? It is experience. It is memory. The lights dimmed further. From around the corner came the sound of stone grinding against stone, slow, deliberate steps. I bolted in the opposite direction, toward what should be the main atrium. If I could reach the front entrance. The hallway opened into the grand staircase area, but something was wrong. The marble steps no longer descended to the main level but spiraled downward indefinitely, disappearing into darkness. The massive chandelier above had transformed, its crystal ornaments replaced with small obsidian masks, each one turning slowly to track my movement. From everywhere and nowhere, whispers filled the air, countless voices speaking in languages both known and forgotten. See us. Remember. Become. My phone vibrated. Against all logic, I had a signal. 1 bar, One chance. I fumbled with the device, pulling up the contact for Director Harlow. If anyone knew what was happening, it would be him. The call connected. Static, then his voice, unnaturally calm. Dr. Reynolds. I see you've met our permanent collection. Harlow? What's happening? The mask, the artifacts, they're alive somehow. A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, overlaid with something ancient and cold. Not alive. Awake. There's a difference. Help me, I pleaded. I cannot. No one can. You've been chosen. His tone softened slightly. If it helps, I was selected much the same way, 30 years ago. It gets easier, becoming a conduit. The line went dead. The phone screen flickered, displaying not my call log but a single line of text in cuneiform that transformed before my eyes into English. The mask is not the artifact. You are. Something heavy and cold settled on my shoulder, a hand made of stone. I didn't need to look to know what stood behind me. Instead, I pushed off from the balustrade and leapt onto the spiraling staircase, taking the steps 3 at a time. The darkness below seemed preferable to what pursued me. As I descended, the architecture around me shifted between eras, one moment Babylonian columns, the next Gothic arches, then sleek modern minimalism, then back to ancient stone. The museum wasn't just a building, it was a palimpsest of all architecture, all history. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Among them now, I recognized voices from my past, professors, colleagues, even my own voice reading artifact descriptions aloud during lectures. The staircase finally ended at a massive circular door made of metal I couldn't identify, neither bronze nor iron, but something older. Its surface was covered in raised symbols similar to those on the mask, spiraling from the outer edge toward the center. Behind me, multiple sets of footsteps echoed on the stairs, some the scrape of stone, others normal human steps. The headless priest and Director Harlow, I assumed, perhaps others. The circular door had no visible handle or mechanism. In desperation, I pressed my palm against its center. The metal was warm, pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat. The symbols began to glow with the same blue luminescence as the mask's inscriptions. The door swung inward silently, revealing a chamber that defied comprehension. It was the museum's main gallery, and it wasn't. The familiar display cases stood in their proper places, but instead of containing artifacts, each held a living person, frozen mid-motion like exhibits. Some I recognized, colleagues, security guards, visitors I'd seen earlier that day. Their eyes followed me as I stumbled into the room. They were conscious, aware, trapped. In the center of the gallery, on a pedestal where no display should be, sat the obsidian mask, waiting. The door closed behind me with the finality of a tomb being sealed. I was no longer alone. The headless priest stood to one side of the mask, Director Harlow to the other. Behind them, a semicircle of figures in various historical dress, men and women from every era, their eyes holding the same ancient awareness I'd seen in the priest. The keepers, Harlow said, gesturing to them. We who remember. We who preserve. What have you done to these people? I demanded, pointing to the human exhibits in their glass cases. Nothing they didn't do to the artifacts, the priest answered. They touched without understanding. They possessed without communion. The mask rose from its pedestal, hovering in the air between us. You have a choice, Harlow said. Join us willingly as a keeper, or join them as memory. The mask rotated slowly, its empty eye sockets fixing on me with palpable intensity. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. The mask hung suspended in the air before me, waiting. The obsidian surface no longer appeared solid but seemed to shift like dark water, the eye holes deeper than physically possible. Every museum has its true keepers, Director Harlow said softly. Those who understand that artifacts are not objects but vessels, doorways to experience. I don't understand, I whispered, but part of me was beginning to. The semicircle of historical figures moved closer. I recognized clothing styles spanning millennia, a woman in Minoan dress, a man wearing Tang Dynasty robes, another in Victorian academic attire. All had the same ageless eyes. We were like you, the Victorian man said, his accent crisp despite the centuries. Scholars who sought knowledge in objects, never realizing the objects sought something in return. The Minoan woman approached, her movements fluid and graceful. The choice is simple. Become a keeper and maintain the balance between the world of objects and the world of memory, or become memory yourself. I glanced at the display cases containing my frozen colleagues. And them? They chose poorly, Harlow replied. They saw only artifacts to be owned, studied, categorized. They could not open their minds to the truth that to truly know history, one must experience it. They become what they created, exhibits stripped of context, preserving form without essence. The mask drifted closer to my face. I could feel its pull, a gravity beyond the physical. Why me? My voice trembled. The headless priest moved forward. You asked questions beyond categorization. When you touched the artifacts, you wondered about the hands that made them, the eyes that beheld them. You sought connection, not possession. And now we offer true connection, Harlow added. The mask doesn't conceal identity, it reveals it. Through it, you will experience the memories of all who wore it before. You will understand history as it was lived. Part of me, the rational, scientific part, screamed that this was impossible, a hallucination, perhaps even a psychotic break. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to ancient mysteries, recognized truth when it stood before me. The mask hovered inches from my face now. Behind it, the semicircle of keepers watched with ancient patience. If I refuse? I asked, already knowing the answer. Then you join the collection, the priest said simply. Your body preserved, your experiences extracted and distilled for others to witness. Nothing is wasted. I looked again at my colleagues in their glass prisons. Their eyes pleaded silently. Can they be freed? They are not prisoners, the Minoan woman said. They are memory made manifest. In time, when their experiences have been fully integrated into the archive, their physical forms will return to dust. Their essence remains. The mask trembled in the air, eager now. I could feel its hunger, not malevolent, but ancient and patient. I reached up slowly, my fingers brushing the cool obsidian surface. Images flashed through my mind, temples and battlefields, births and deaths, civilizations rising and falling. Countless lives, countless experiences, all preserved within. Will I still be myself? I whispered. Harlow's expression softened. You will be more than yourself. You will be everyone who ever wore the mask, and they will be you. But your center will remain. My academic mind raced through the implications. If what they said was true, this was beyond archaeological discovery, this was direct communion with history itself. What would I have to do, as a keeper? Preserve the balance, the priest answered. Guide worthy seekers to understanding. prevent the unworthy from reducing memory to mere objects. When the time comes, help select the next keeper. I looked at Harlow, really looked at him for the first time. How had I never noticed the ancientness in his eyes? Had he always been more than just a museum director? How long have you been a keeper? I asked him. Time means little once you've worn the mask, he replied. But by your reckoning, 30 years in this identity. Before that, other lives, other names. The mask drifted closer still, the eye holes aligned with my own eyes now. Through them, I glimpsed something vast and incomprehensible, a repository of memories stretching back to the dawn of human consciousness. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The moment of choice had arrived. If I accept, what happens to my life? My identity? On the surface, little changes, Harlow said. You continue your work, but you will see what others cannot. You will know what the artifacts truly contain. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I accept. The mask moved of its own accord, pressing against my face. It should have been solid, unyielding obsidian, but it molded itself to my features like liquid shadow. Cold spread across my skin, then penetrated deeper, reaching into my mind. 1,000 voices spoke at once. 1,000 lives unfolded within me. I experienced death on a Sumerian battlefield, childbirth in a Mayan village, the raising of the pyramids, the fall of Rome. I was everyone who had ever worn the mask, and they were me. When the flood of memories finally subsided, I found myself on my knees, gasping. The other keepers stood around me in a circle, no longer separate individuals but extensions of a shared consciousness I now belonged to. The mask was gone, or rather, it had become part of me. I could feel it just beneath my skin, a presence waiting to be called forth when needed. Rise, keeper, the headless priest intoned. The night grows late, and there is much to learn. I stood on unsteady legs, my perception forever altered. The museum around us had changed again, or perhaps I was simply seeing it as it truly was, not just a building housing artifacts, but a living archive of human experience. What now? I asked, my voice containing echoes of others who had asked the same question throughout millennia. Now you return, Harlow said. The sun will rise soon. The museum will open. You will continue your duties as before, but with new understanding. And the others? I glanced at the exhibition cases where my colleagues remained frozen. They will be released when they learn to see, the priest answered. Some never do. For them, becoming memory is a kindness. The circle of keepers began to disperse, fading like mist until only Harlow remained. It gets easier, he said gently. The weight of memory becomes bearable in time. Will I see them again? We are always here, he replied. In the spaces between objects, in the silence after closing, in the dust motes dancing through exhibit lights. You are never alone now. He gestured toward a door that hadn't been there before. Go. Resume your life, but remember your purpose. I walked toward the door, my movements already more graceful, influenced by the countless lives now residing within me. Before crossing the threshold, I turned back. Director Harlow? Was any of this real? In the conventional sense? He smiled enigmatically. What is more real, the object or the experience it contains? The artifact or the hands that crafted it? With that, he faded away, leaving me alone. I pushed through the door and found myself in the museum's main corridor. Morning light streamed through the high windows. A cleaning crew moved quietly through the galleries, preparing for the day's visitors. My watch read 7:15. I had been in the museum all night, but what had transpired seemed to exist outside of conventional time. A security guard nodded as he passed. "Morning, Dr. Reynolds. Everything okay? You look a bit pale." "Just a long night," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of memories still settling within me. "Well, better head home and get some rest," he said. "Big day tomorrow with the Mesopotamian exhibit opening." "Yes," I agreed. "It's going to be quite remarkable." As I walked toward the exit, I passed the gallery where the obsidian mask was displayed. The case had been repaired, the glass pristine as if never broken. Inside, the mask sat on its stand, appearing to be nothing more than an ancient artifact of obsidian and lapis lazuli. Only I could see how it watched the passing visitors, waiting for the next worthy keeper. Outside, the morning air felt sharp and clean. The city was awakening, people rushing to work, unaware of the true nature of history preserved in the building behind me. I touched my face, feeling my features, still my own, yet forever changed. Beneath the skin, I felt the mask's presence, waiting. A young woman passed by, university textbooks clutched to her chest. On top was a volume on Mesopotamian archaeology. Our eyes met briefly, and I wondered if someday she might find her way to the mask, if she might have the capacity to truly see. Only time would tell. And time, I now understood, was the most precious artifact of all. Have you ever felt that moment when silence itself seems to breathe? When the absence of sound becomes so oppressive that it transforms into a presence of its own? I stood at the edge of St. Augustine's churchyard, my camera hanging heavy around my neck. The ancient stone building loomed against the late afternoon sky, its withered facade catching the fading light in a way that made the shadows seem to crawl across the warm gravestones. The bell tower rose highest of all, stark and imposing against gathering clouds. My name is Daniel Wheeler, and I'm a freelance photographer specializing in historical architecture. Nothing about me suggested I was someone who would become entangled with things beyond understanding. I was 34, practical to a fault, and had built a respectable career documenting old buildings for magazines and restoration projects. St. Augustine's was my latest assignment, a 12th century church in a nearly abandoned village. The local historical society had commissioned me to document the building before major restoration work began next month. They'd mentioned something about strange acoustics in the bell tower, but I hadn't paid much attention. Old buildings made sounds, it was part of their charm. As I approached the church entrance, something caught my eye, a slight movement at one of the upper windows. Just a flicker, like someone passing by inside. But that was impossible. Father Matthias, the caretaker who was supposed to meet me, had texted that he was running late. I checked my watch, 4:17. The sun would set in less than 2 hours, leaving me precious little time to capture the exterior in good light. I decided to start working while waiting for the caretaker. The churchyard air felt unusually still. Typically, these old grounds had birdsong or at least the rustle of wind through ancient yew trees, but here there was nothing. The silence pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool. I began taking photos of the exterior, moving methodically around the perimeter. When I reached the northern wall, my skin prickled. The temperature had dropped noticeably, though I couldn't see any obvious reason why this section should be colder. My breath came out in small white clouds despite it being a mild October day. Odd spot, that one. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Behind me stood a man in clerical attire, late 60s, with a face lined by decades of rural living. He extended his hand. Father Matthias. Sorry to startle you. I shook his hand, noting how cold his fingers felt. Daniel Wheeler. No problem at all. I was just noticing how much colder it is on this side. Yes, always has been. Even on the hottest summer days. He glanced up at the bell tower looming above us. Some say it's because of the North Bell. The North Bell? There are 4 bells in the tower. The North Bell hasn't been rung properly in over 300 years. Not since Father William's time. Something in his tone made me curious. What happened to Father William? Father Matthias's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Come inside. I'll show you around before it gets dark. The church interior was exactly what you'd expect from a structure of its age, stone pillars rising to a vaulted ceiling, stained glass windows filtering the light into colored shards that danced across worn flagstones. Yet something felt off about the space. The acoustics were strange. My footsteps seemed to echo longer than they should have. The main nave dates to 1196, Father Matthias said, his voice resonating oddly. The bell tower was added 70 years later. As we moved through the church, I found myself repeatedly drawn to looking up toward the tower, though it wasn't visible from inside. Something about it tugged at my attention. Can we see the bell tower? I asked. Father Matthias hesitated. It's not really part of the tour. The stairs are quite steep and narrow. I'd like to include it in my documentation. The Historical Society mentioned something about unusual acoustics up there. The priest's face grew troubled. Yes, there are acoustical anomalies. But the tower access is locked, and... A sound interrupted him, distant but unmistakable. A single bell tone, low and mournful, reverberating through the stone walls. Father Matthias froze, his face draining of color. Is someone else here? I asked. No. His voice was barely audible. That's not possible. Well, somebody just rang a bell. No one rang it. The bells haven't been manually rung since we installed the electronic carillon 20 years ago. He glanced at his watch. And they're not programmed to ring at this hour. I laughed nervously. Maybe your system has a glitch? Perhaps. But he didn't sound convinced. Let me show you the rest of the church. We should finish before dark. As we continued the tour, I noticed Father Matthias growing increasingly uneasy. His commentary became briefer, his gaze constantly drifting toward the ceiling, toward the unseen bell tower above us. When we reached the back of the church, a small memorial plaque caught my eye. It was older than the others, the inscription worn but still legible. In memory of Father William Blackthorne 1642 to 1685, who died in service to God and his flock, let he who rings the bell attend its toll. Is this the Father William you mentioned earlier? I asked. Father Matthias nodded curtly. Yes. There's a rather unpleasant history there. What happened to him? The priest sighed, as if deciding how much to tell me. The official record states he fell from the bell tower while attempting to ring the North Bell during a storm. But local legends suggest otherwise. What do the legends say? That he was pushed. Or worse, that he jumped after claiming to hear voices coming from the bell itself. A chill that had nothing to do with the building's temperature ran down my spine. After his death, strange things began happening whenever the North Bell was rung. People reported hearing additional sounds. Whispers. Crying. Eventually, they stopped using that bell altogether. I was about to ask more when the sound came again, a single, deep toll that seemed to vibrate through my bones. But this time, in its fading resonance, I thought I heard something else. A voice, perhaps. A word I couldn't quite make out. Father Matthias grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. I think we should conclude for today. But I've barely started. Please, Mr. Wheeler. The light is fading, and I have evening obligations. Come back tomorrow morning. Something in his expression made me agree. As he practically rushed me toward the exit, I noticed that the temperature had dropped throughout the church. My breath fogged in front of me, and the air felt dense, as if it carried some invisible weight. At the door, Father Matthias pressed a heavy iron key into my hand. For tomorrow, I have to attend to matters in the village. Just lock up when you're done and return the key to the parish office. Before I could respond, he was gone, hurrying across the churchyard without looking back. I stood alone at the church entrance, key in hand, watching the priest's retreating figure. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the gravestones. I should have left too, packed up my equipment and returned in the morning light. Instead, I turned back toward the dark church interior. One more look, I told myself. Just a few more photos while the evening light created those perfect shadows across the nave. As I stepped inside and the heavy door swung shut behind me, I heard it again, the bell. But this time, the sound was different. Not the clean, resonant toll of bronze against Stryker, but something dampened and wrong. And in its echo, unmistakably, a human voice. It sounded like someone weeping. I froze in the church's doorway, straining to hear. The weeping sound faded, leaving only the usual creaks and settling noises of an ancient building. Had I imagined it? The twilight was playing tricks with my senses, the fading light casting strange shadows through the stained glass. Against my better judgment, I moved deeper into the church. The sound had seemed to come from above, from the direction of the bell tower. My flashlight beam cut through the growing darkness, illuminating dust motes that swirled in unnatural patterns, as if disturbed by movement where there should be none. Hello? My voice echoed oddly, bouncing back at me from unexpected angles. No response. Just the pressing silence of the empty church. I set up my tripod near the altar to capture the last of the colored light filtering through the western rose window. Through my viewfinder, I noticed something I missed earlier, a small door partially hidden behind a wooden panel, almost invisible unless you were looking from this specific angle. Curiosity pulled me toward it. The door was made of ancient oak, reinforced with iron bands gone rusty with age. A simple latch held it closed, no lock. When I pulled it open, it revealed a narrow stone staircase winding upward. The bell tower access. Father Matthias had said it was locked, but here it was, apparently accessible all along. The stairs disappeared into darkness above. I should have waited until tomorrow, returned with the priest as a guide. That would have been the sensible choice. Instead, I pointed my flashlight up the stairwell and began to climb. The stairs wound tightly upward, the walls pressing close on either side. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a musty scent of old wood, stone, and something metallic that reminded me of blood. The beam of my flashlight seemed to dim, struggling against the oppressive darkness. After what felt like too many turns for the height of the tower, I reached a small landing with another door, this one secured with an old iron padlock. So Father Matthias hadn't been lying, the tower was locked. But as I shone my light on the padlock, I noticed something strange. Though ancient and rusted, it hung open, the hasp free from its catch. Someone had unlocked it. I hesitated, hand hovering over the padlock. The sensible part of me said to turn back, to wait until morning. But another part, a curious, reckless part, needed to know what was behind that door, what had made that weeping sound. I removed the padlock and pushed the door open. The bell chamber was larger than I'd expected, with 4 massive bronze bells hanging from heavy wooden beams. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight, and the air was noticeably colder than even the stairwell had been. I could see my breath forming clouds in front of me. The bells hung silent and still, no sign of whatever had caused the sounds I heard. Each bell faced a different cardinal direction, just as Father Matthias had described. I moved toward the northern bell, the one that supposedly hadn't been rung for centuries. It was larger than the others, its bronze surface discolored with age and tarnish. Unlike its companions, which had simple decorative bands around their rims, this bell was covered in intricate engravings, symbols, and letters in a script I didn't recognize. Along the bottom edge, however, was an inscription in Latin, Voca me, et respondibo tibi. Call me, and I will answer you. Something caught my eye, a small dark stain on the stone floor beneath the north bell. I crouched to examine it, tracing my fingers over the discoloration. It seemed to be embedded in the stone itself, not a recent mark. The shape resembled a splatter pattern, like something had fallen from above. Or someone. A sudden draft caused the dust to swirl around me, and I heard it again, that sound, like distant weeping. But it wasn't coming from the bells. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the very stone beneath my feet. Is someone here? I called, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. The weeping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the sound had been. Then, a whisper, so close it could have been breathed directly into my ear, "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, but there was no one. I was completely alone in the bell chamber. "Who's there?" My voice trembled despite my efforts to keep it steady. No answer came, but the temperature dropped further. My exposed skin prickled with goosebumps, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. The beam of my flashlight flickered, dimming momentarily before returning to full strength. Something moved in my peripheral vision, a shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, slipping between the bells. I backed toward the door, unwilling to turn my back on the chamber. As I reached the threshold, my flashlight caught something on the wall I hadn't noticed before, a small portrait in an ornate frame, blackened with age and dust. I moved closer, wiping the grime from the glass with my sleeve. The painting revealed a thin-faced man in clerical garb from the 17th century. His eyes seemed to follow me, intense and troubled. Below the portrait was a tarnished brass plate with an inscription, Father William Blackthorne, Bellkeeper, 1642 to 1685. The man from the memorial plaque. The priest who had allegedly fallen, or jumped, from this very tower. As I stared at the portrait, a freezing gust of wind swept through the bell chamber. The 4 bells began to sway slightly, though there was no way a breeze could have entered the enclosed space with such force. The north bell moved more than the others, its massive bronze body rocking back and forth. A low, almost subsonic vibration filled the air, building in intensity until my teeth ached and my vision blurred. Then, with a deafening crack, the north bell tolled. The sound was nothing like the clear tones I'd heard earlier. This was distorted, agonized, as if the metal itself were in pain. The vibrations seemed to penetrate my body, rattling my bones and sending waves of nausea through my stomach. And within that terrible sound, voices. Dozens of them, wailing, pleading, screaming. So many voices trapped within the bronze, fighting to be heard. I dropped my flashlight and clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to block the noise. The other bells began to swing more violently, adding their own voices to the cacophony. The entire tower seemed to tremble. Through watering eyes, I saw the portrait of Father Blackthorn changing. The painted face was moving, the mouth opening in a silent scream that somehow cut through all the other noise. The eyes, no longer painted but alive and full of terror, fixed on mine. I ran. I stumbled down the winding staircase, the sounds from the bell chamber pursuing me. Twice I nearly fell, my panicked feet missing steps in the darkness. I'd left my flashlight behind, but I barely noticed. The stairwell was now illuminated by an unnatural bluish light that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. When I finally burst through the door into the main church, I slammed it shut behind me and leaned against it, gasping for breath. The sounds from above were muffled now but still audible, the bells still tolling their distorted notes, the voices still wailing. The church was nearly dark, the last rays of sunlight long gone. Only the faint illumination of the security lights outside filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the nave. I needed to get out, to get as far from this place as possible. As I made my way toward the main entrance, I noticed something different about the church. The memorial plaques I'd seen earlier had changed. Every single one now bore the same name, William Blackthorn. Every epitaph was identical. Let he who rings the bell attend its toll. I broke into a run, no longer caring about the equipment I was abandoning. The main doors loomed ahead, my only escape from this nightmare. But as I reached for the handle, a figure materialized before me, a man in clerical robes, his face gaunt and pale, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. He wore the same face as the portrait in the bell tower, but twisted now with a mixture of sorrow and rage. Father William Blackthorn stood between me and freedom. "You rang the bell," he said, his voice simultaneously distant and impossibly close, as if it came from inside my own head. "Now you must attend its toll." I backed away, searching desperately for another exit. "I didn't ring any bell. You entered the tower. You disturbed its slumber." The apparition drifted closer, leaving no footprints in the dust that covered the floor. "He's awake now. He knows you're here." Who's awake?" My back hit a stone pillar. I couldn't retreat any further. Father Blackthorn's form flickered like a candle in a draft. The one who waits in the bell. The one I tried to contain. The one who took my life when I refused to free him. The temperature around me plummeted. I could no longer feel my fingers or toes. "He calls to the living," the ghost continued, his voice growing fainter. "He promises knowledge, power, freedom from mortal constraints. But his gifts come with a price." "What price?" I whispered, though part of me didn't want to know. The ghost's form was fading now, becoming transparent. Beyond him, I could see the church doors swing open on their own, revealing the darkness of the churchyard beyond. "See for yourself," Father Blackthorn whispered as he disappeared entirely. "He's waiting for you in the tower." I stood alone in the silent church, the doors wide open before me, offering escape. The bell tower door behind me remained closed, but I could feel something pressing against it from the other side, something ancient and patient and hungry. The choice seemed obvious. Run. Leave this place and never return. But as I took a step toward the exit, the weeping sound returned, not from the tower this time, but from outside, from the darkness of the churchyard. Multiple voices now, calling wordlessly, filled with such profound grief that my heart ached to hear them. They were waiting for me out there, whatever they were. The church doors swung shut again, cutting off my escape. Behind me, the tower door creaked open. I stood frozen between two impossibilities, the closed main doors and the open tower entrance behind me. The church that had seemed so ordinary hours ago had transformed into something else entirely, a place where the boundaries between past and present, living and dead, had worn dangerously thin. A whisper floated from the tower stairwell, "Come back." Against every instinct, I turned toward it. The doorway to the tower stairs yawned open, darkness spilling out like ink. But not complete darkness. There was that strange, bluish illumination I'd noticed before, pulsing gently, almost like a heartbeat. I pulled out my phone, intending to call for help, but there was no signal. Not even emergency services were available. The screen showed the time as 12 past midnight, which couldn't be right. I'd entered the church just before sunset, around 6. I couldn't have been here for 6 hours. Unless time itself was different in this place. A sudden pounding on the main doors made me jump. Someone was outside, hammering frantically. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" The voice was muffled but recognizable. Father Matthias. Hope surged through me. I rushed to the doors, pulling at the handles. They wouldn't budge. Father Matthias. I'm trapped inside. The doors won't open. Mr. Wheeler? Thank God you're alive. Listen carefully. You need to get out of there immediately. The church isn't safe after dark, especially not tonight. I can't get out. The doors are locked or stuck. There was a pause before Father Matthias spoke again, his voice tighter now. Where are you standing right now? Are you near the bell tower? I'm by the main doors, but the tower door is open. I was up there earlier, and... You went into the tower? The priest's voice rose in alarm. Did you touch the north bell? Did you hear anything unusual? Before I could answer, a deep toll sounded from above, the same distorted, agonized sound I heard earlier. The vibrations shook dust from the ceiling. He's awake, Father Matthias said, his voice now barely audible through the thick wood. I can't help you from here. There's only one way out for you now. What do you mean? What way? You have to go back to the tower. Find Father William's journal. It should be hidden somewhere in the bell chamber. It contains the rite of binding. It's the only way to contain what's been released. Another toll sounded, louder than before. The stained glass windows rattled in their frames. I don't understand. What's happening? I shouted, pressing closer to the door. The north bell contains something ancient, something that was here long before the church was built. Father William discovered it and tried to bind it, but it killed him. Every 300 years, it gains enough strength to call someone to the tower, someone to set it free. The weeping sounds returned, now coming from all around me, from the walls, the floor, the very air itself. What is it? I asked, my voice shaking. A collector of souls, Father Matthias replied. It feeds on despair. On the last night of every 3rd century, it calls to those who pass near the church. Father William tried to stop it in 1685 and paid with his life. Now it's awakening again. The blue light from the tower stairwell intensified, pulsing more rapidly. I'll try to find another way in, Father Matthias called, his voice fading as if he were moving away. But if I can't reach you in time, you must find the journal and complete the binding ritual. It's the only way to save yourself and anyone else that might call tonight. Wait. Don't leave me here. I pounded on the door, but there was no response. Father Matthias was gone. I turned back to face the nave. The church had changed again. The pews were now rotted and broken, the floor covered with a thick layer of dust undisturbed by footprints, except for my own and a second set that led from the bell tower door toward the altar. These new footprints were strange, too large for a normal person, with an odd, elongated shape that narrowed at the heel. They glistened wetly in the dim light, as if whoever, or whatever, had made them was soaking wet. As I watched, new prints began to appear, one after another, pressing into the dust as if formed by invisible feet. They were coming toward me. I bolted for the tower door. If Father Matthias was right, my only chance was to find this journal and perform whatever ritual it contained. At least in the tower, I knew what I was facing, the malevolent bell, the ghost of Father William. Out here, with those advancing footprints. I slammed the tower door behind me and began to climb the winding stairs, guided by the pulsing blue light. The weeping sounds grew louder as I ascended, but they had changed. There was a note of anticipation in them now, almost eagerness. When I reached the bell chamber, I found it transformed. The dust was gone, the bells polished to a high shine. Candles burned in iron sconces around the walls, though there was no one present who could have lit them. The north bell hung motionless, but the air around it seemed to bend and distort, as if the space itself was warped by its presence. A small writing desk stood in one corner, its surface covered with yellowed papers, an inkwell, and a quill. This hadn't been here during my first visit. On the desk lay a leather-bound book, its cover embossed with the same strange symbols I'd seen on the north bell. Father William's journal. I approached cautiously, half expecting the ghost to materialize and stop me. But the chamber remained empty save for the bells and the desk. When I touched the journal, a jolt of static electricity sparked between my fingers and the leather, making me snatch my hand back. The second attempt was successful. I opened the journal to find pages of dense, handwritten text in an archaic form of English, interspersed with diagrams, symbols, and what appeared to be incantations in Latin and some other language I couldn't identify. I flipped through until I found an entry dated October 31st, 1685, the day Father William died. It comes tonight. I can feel it stirring within the bronze, hungry after 3 centuries of slumber. My preparations are complete, but I fear they may not be enough. The binding ritual requires more than I may be able to give. If I fail, and these words are found by another, know this: the entity cannot be destroyed, only contained. The bell is its prison and its conduit. It will call to you with voices of those it has taken, promising release from their suffering. Do not listen. Do not approach the bell unless you are prepared to complete the binding. The ritual requires 3 elements: blood freely given, a soul freely offered, and the true name of the entity spoken aloud at the moment of sacrifice. I have discovered this name in my research, but dare not write it here lest casual eyes read it and accidentally invoke its power. Instead, I have hidden the name where only a seeker would find it, inscribed upon the clapper of the north bell itself. To read it is to know it, to speak it is to summon it fully into this world. May God forgive what I must do tonight, and may He receive my soul if I fail. The journal ended there. On the final page was a detailed description of the binding ritual, complete with Latin phrases to be recited and instructions for the blood offering, a cut across the palm, dripping onto the bell itself. But there was nothing about how to access the clapper to read the entity's name, which was apparently essential to the ritual. And the soul freely offered part sounded ominously like suicide. A sound behind me made me turn. Father William stood there, his ghostly form more solid than before. In the candlelight, I could see details I missed earlier: the rope burns around his neck, the unnatural angle of his head. He hadn't fallen from the tower. He hanged himself, part of the ritual, the soul freely offered. "You found my journal," he said, his voice clearer now. "Then you understand what must be done." "You killed yourself to complete the ritual," I said. "But it didn't work, did it? The entity is still here, still calling people every 300 years. Father William's ghost drifted closer. I failed at the final moment. My faith faltered. I could not speak its name as my life ebbed away. The binding was incomplete. His hollow eyes fixed on mine. "You must succeed where I failed. You're asking me to die. I'm asking you to save countless others. If the entity escapes tonight, it will no longer be bound to this place. It will be free to roam, to feed on despair and grief wherever it finds them." Another bell toll shook the chamber, the distorted sound setting my teeth on edge. The voices within it were louder now, more distinct. I could almost make out words. "How do I see the name?" I asked. "How do I access the clapper?" Father William gestured toward the north bell. "The bell must be raised from its housing. There are mechanisms." He was interrupted by a deafening crack from below, like the sound of the main church doors being splintered open. "It's too late," the ghost whispered. "He's here." "Who's here?" "The other one. The guardian of the threshold. The entity cannot pass into our world alone. It needs help from this side. A living servant prepares the way." Heavy footsteps sounded on the stone stairs, too heavy for a normal human. They were accompanied by a wet, slapping sound and the smell of stagnant water. "Father Matthias," I breathed, suddenly understanding. Father William nodded grimly. "Not a priest at all, but a guardian chosen 3 centuries ago. The entity promises long life to its servants, but such gifts come with terrible costs." The footsteps reached the landing outside the bell chamber. Something massive and heavy pressed against the door, making the wood creak and the iron hinges groan. "You must complete the ritual now," Father William urged. "Before he enters, I will show you the name." The ghost drifted toward the north bell and passed through it like smoke. The bell began to glow with an inner light, illuminating the symbols carved into its surface. Slowly, it began to rise from its housing, lifting without any visible means of support until the massive clapper within was exposed. There, etched into the metal and flowing script, was a name, a word in no language I recognized, a sequence of symbols more than letters. The door to the bell chamber burst open. The thing that entered was no longer Father Matthias. It wore his face, or something approximating it, stretched tight over a skull too large and misshapen to be human. Its body was elongated and bent, standing at least 7 feet tall, with limbs that hung at impossible angles. Water dripped constantly from its sodden robes, forming a widening pool on the stone floor. But it was the eyes that drew my horrified gaze, bulging orbs that glowed with the same blue light I'd seen earlier, pupils elongated into vertical slits like a cat's. Those eyes fixed on me with terrible intelligence and hunger. "You should not have come back to the tower," it said in a voice that was still recognizably Father Matthias's, though layered with something else, something ancient and cold. "But now that you're here, you can help us complete what was started 3 centuries ago." I backed away until I hit the wall beside the hovering north bell. "Who are you really?" The creature's mouth stretched into a smile too wide for its face. "I am the keeper of the way. For 300 years, I have guarded this place, waiting for this night. It gestured at the north bell. My master grows impatient. The time has come for his release. Your master is trapped in the bell? Not in it. Behind it. The bell is merely the door, a door that swings both ways. Father William understood this too late. He thought he could seal the door forever, but he only managed to close it for a time. The entity's form shifted and blurred, as if struggling to maintain its human appearance. For a moment, I glimpsed something else beneath the disguise, something scaled and glistening, with too many limbs. Why me? I asked, trying to keep it talking while my mind raced through options. Why did you bring me here? We did not choose you specifically. The call goes out to all who pass near on this night. You were simply the one who answered. The creature took a step closer, leaving footprints identical to those I'd seen in the church below. But now that you're here, you are perfect for our purpose. A witness. A chronicler. One who understands the value of preserving history. As it spoke, the north bell began to vibrate, its metal surface rippling like water. The other bells in the tower started swinging on their own, building to a cacophony of sound. The ghost of Father William materialized between me and the creature. Do not listen to its lies. It needs more than a witness, it needs a sacrifice. A soul freely given to open the way completely. The creature hissed, its borrowed face contorting with rage. Still interfering, priest? 300 years of failure not enough for you? It lunged forward with inhuman speed, passing through the ghost as if through mist, its elongated hands reaching for me. I ducked and rolled, scrambling away across the stone floor. My hand closed around a piece of broken wood, a fragment of the shattered door. As the creature turned to track me, I noticed something strange. It avoided moving directly beneath the north bell, circling around it instead. The water dripping from its robes sizzled and steamed when it came too close to the metal. Father William's ghost noticed my observation. The bell was consecrated, he said quickly. Cast with holy water and blessed silver. It pains creatures like him to touch it. I gripped my makeshift weapon tighter, but I doubted it would do much against something that had lived for centuries. How do I fight it? You cannot fight it directly, but you can complete what I started. The ghost pointed to the journal on the desk. The ritual. If you can speak the name written on the clapper while offering blood and soul, the way will be sealed for another 300 years. And I have to die to do this? A soul freely offered doesn't necessarily mean death, Father William said. It means sacrifice, something precious given willingly. In my despair, I thought only my life would suffice. I was wrong. The creature lunged again, faster than I could react. Its cold, with hands closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground. Up close, I could see that what I'd taken for sodden robes were actually layers of algae and water plants clinging to glistening skin. The smell of stagnant water and decay filled my nostrils. Enough talk, it growled. The door opens tonight. You will help us, willing or not. It carried me toward the north bell, which was now glowing so brightly that I had to squint against the light. The air around it shimmered and distorted, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Through that distortion, I caught glimpses of somewhere else. A vast, dark space filled with swirling mists and distant, moving shapes. The creature held me directly beneath the bell, in the center of its opening. Above us, I could see the clapper with its inscribed name, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift as I looked at them, refusing to remain fixed in my vision. Read it, the creature commanded, its grip tightening around my throat. Speak the name and open the way. I struggled for breath, clawing at the inhuman hands that held me. Through darkening vision, I saw Father William's ghost hovering nearby, his expression anguished. The ritual must be willing, the ghost insisted. A soul freely offered. The creature snarled. After centuries of imprisonment, my master is not particular about the details. Speak the name, photographer, or I will crush your throat and use your dying breath to speak it myself. My lungs burn for air. Spots dance before my eyes. In desperation, I swung the broken piece of wood still clutched in my hand, aiming for the creature's face. To my surprise, it connected with a wet thunk, driving splinters into the thing's cheek. The creature howled, not in pain but in outrage, and flung me aside. I crashed into the desk, scattering papers and knocking over the inkwell. As I gasped for breath, something on one of the fallen papers caught my eye, a diagram showing the bell tower, but with additional structures beneath it, extending deep into the earth. At the bottom was a chamber marked with symbols similar to those on the bell, labeled in Father William's handwriting, the Elder Gate. The creature was advancing on me again, blue ichor leaking from the wound on its face. No more games, it growled. My master's patience is at an end. Behind it, the air beneath the north belt continued to distort and thin. Through that warping, the other place was becoming more visible, a landscape of twisted spires and impossible architecture shrouded in mist. Something vast moved within that mist, something with too many limbs and eyes. Father William's ghost appeared at my side. The journal, he whispered urgently. The final page. I fumbled among the scattered papers until I found it, the last page of the journal, containing the binding ritual. But as I scanned the Latin phrases and instructions, I realized there was something wrong. This isn't complete, I hissed. There's text missing. Turn it over, the ghost urged. I flipped the page. On the back, written in a shaky hand as if penned in great haste or pain, were additional instructions. The true binding requires not death but purpose. The soul offered must be that of a guardian willing to stand watch. Blood freely given, renewed with each passing year. The name spoken not in fear but in command. 3 centuries I have watched and waited, unable to complete what I began. My failure becomes your opportunity. Choose guardianship, and the cycle might finally end. The creature lunged for me again. This time I was ready, rolling aside at the last moment. It crashed into the desk, splintering the ancient wood. You can't escape, it snarled, righting itself. The doors are sealed. The tower is locked. There is only one way out now. It gestured toward the distortion beneath the bell, which had grown larger. The otherworldly landscape was clearer now, and the massive shape moving within it was drawing closer to the boundary between worlds. My master offers you a choice, the creature continued. Speak the name willingly and join us as a servant, or die here and have your soul added to his collection. Father William's ghost drifted between us. There is another choice. Complete the ritual as it was meant to be. Become the guardian. Shut up, priest, the creature roared, swiping at the ghost, its clawed hand passing harmlessly through the spectral form. I looked between them, mind racing. What exactly does becoming a guardian mean? Binding yourself to this place, Father William explained quickly. Watching over the bell, ensuring the ritual is renewed each year with a drop of blood freely given. Living out your days as keeper of the secret until another can be found to take your place. A prison sentence, the creature spat. A lonely existence in this decaying church while the world moves on without you. It wasn't wrong. The thought of spending years, maybe the rest of my life, tethered to this place was terrifying. But the alternative? I looked at the distortion beneath the bell, at the nightmarish landscape trying to bleed through into our world. Whatever waited on the other side of that boundary was far worse than a life of solitude. What do I need to do? I asked Father William. The ghost pointed to the journal page. Blood freely given on the bell itself. The name spoken in command, not supplication. And a vow, a willing pledge to serve as guardian until another can be found. The creature roared and charged me again. I dove aside, but this time it anticipated my move. Its clawed hand caught my ankle, dragging me toward it. "You will not deny us again," it howled, its borrowed face now barely recognizable as human. The disguise was slipping, revealing glossy black scales and too many rows of teeth. With desperate strength, I kicked free and scrambled toward the north bell. It hung suspended in midair, still glowing with that eerie blue light. The clapper with its inscribed name swung gently within. The creature was right behind me, reaching with elongated fingers. The door opens tonight. 3 centuries of waiting ends now. I pressed my palm against the sharp edge of the bell's rim, wincing as it cut into my flesh. Blood welled up and ran down the bronze surface, sizzling on contact. "I offer my blood freely," I gasped, following the ritual words from the journal. "I pledge myself as guardian of this gate." The bell began to vibrate, its metal surface rippling like liquid. My blood seemed to be absorbed into the bronze, disappearing as if drunk by the metal itself. The creature grabbed me from behind, its inhuman strength crushing the breath from my lungs. "Speak the name," it commanded, trying to force me to look up at the inscribed clapper. "Speak it and release my master." Through pain and terror, I remembered Father William's final instruction, the name spoken not in fear but in command. I fixed my eyes on the writhing symbols on the clapper, forcing my mind to see them as they truly were, not as they tried to appear. For a moment, they stabilized, forming a word in no human language, a sequence of sounds that my mind could barely comprehend. But I understood its meaning. It was a name of binding, not release. I spoke it aloud, not in surrender to the creature holding me, but as a command to the entity trying to push through from the other side. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The bell rang out with a sound like no earthly instrument could produce, a pure tone that cut through reality itself. The creature holding me screamed, its borrowed form dissolving into a torrent of foul water that splashed across the stone floor. The distortion beneath the bell collapsed in on itself, the glimpses of the other world receding rapidly. The weeping voices I'd heard earlier rose in a chorus of rage and despair before fading to silence. When the bell's note finally died away, I found myself alone in the chamber. The ghost of Father William was gone. The puddle that had been the creature was evaporating into foul-smelling steam. The north bell hung motionless once more, though it still glowed faintly with inner light. My cut palm throbbed, the wound already closing into a thin line that I somehow knew would never fully heal, a permanent reminder of my vow. I had become the guardian. The tower was mine now, and with it, the responsibility to ensure the gate remained closed. Outside, dawn was breaking. Through the tower window, I could see the first rays of sunlight touching the churchyard. The night was over, but my vigilance was just beginning. I gathered the scattered pages of Father William's journal, careful to include every note and diagram. There was much I needed to learn about my new role, about the history of this place and the entity imprisoned beyond the bell. As I descended the tower stairs, I noticed changes in the church below. The rotted pews were whole again. The thick dust was gone. Everything looked as it had when I first entered yesterday evening, peaceful, ordinary, sanctified. But I knew better now. Beneath the venerable stones and sacred symbols lay something ancient and malevolent, something that would never stop trying to break free. At the main entrance, I found the doors unlocked. They swung open easily at my touch, revealing the quiet churchyard beyond. For a moment, I considered simply walking away, abandoning this place and the burden I'd taken on. But as that thought formed, the scar on my palm burned, reminding me of my vow. I had freely offered my service. There would be no going back to my old life, not completely. Instead, I stepped outside long enough to retrieve my camera equipment from where I'd left it. I might be bound to this place, but I could still pursue my work. And more importantly, I could document everything I learned about the bell, the entity, and the gate. Knowledge was power. Father William had discovered this too late. I would not make the same mistake. As I re-entered the church and closed the doors behind me, the north bell tolled once more, softly this time, almost thoughtfully. It was no longer the agonized sound I heard during the night, but a clear, pure note. A reminder, perhaps. Or a warning. Either way, I was listening now. 1 year later, I sat at my desk in the small room adjacent to the bell tower, reviewing my notes as the afternoon light filtered through the narrow window. Father William's journal lay open beside my laptop, its withered pages now familiar companions. In the 12 months since the terrible night, I had learned much about St. Augustine's Church and its dark secret. The entity, whose true name I never spoke aloud after that single time, was far older than Christianity itself. The church had been built deliberately on this spot to contain something that had been worshipped as a god in pre-Roman times, something that fed on human misery and despair. The bell had been cast specifically as a prison, its bronze mixed with blessed silver and inscribed with binding sigils. But 3 centuries ago, the entity had grown strong enough to influence the physical world, calling Father William to the tower and attempting to use him to break free. When that failed, it had chosen another servant, the man I know as Father Matthias, who was actually Richard Corley, a local historian who had disappeared in 1725 while researching the church's history. The entity had kept him alive for 300 years, warping him into something no longer entirely human. My own life had changed dramatically since accepting the role of guardian. I'd maintained my photography career, but now worked remotely, sending in my photos digitally and rarely meeting clients in person. The Church Historical Society, unaware of what had truly happened that night, had been delighted when I volunteered to become the new caretaker of St. Augustine's, accepting the modest stipend that came with the position. I lived in the small caretaker's cottage on the church grounds, venturing into the nearby village only when necessary. Each night, I checked the bell tower, ensuring the north bell remained secure. And each morning, I renewed the binding with a drop of blood from the permanent scar on my palm. The locals thought me eccentric but harmless, the reclusive photographer who'd fallen in love with their ancient church. They had no idea what slept beneath the foundations or what would happen if I ever failed in my duty. I was no prisoner, despite what the creature had claimed. I could leave the grounds for short periods, but I always felt the pull to return, like an invisible tether connected to my heart. And each passing day strengthened my resolve. This was not the life I had chosen, but it was the one I now embraced. Father William's ghost visited occasionally, usually at dusk when the boundary between worlds grew thin. He seemed more at peace now, though he never stayed long. There were others with him sometimes, shadowy figures I glimpsed from the corner of my eye. The souls the entity had claimed during its centuries of influence, perhaps finally finding release. Today marked exactly 1 year since that night. According to Father William's journal, this was significant, a time when the binding would be at its weakest and needed to be reinforced through a more elaborate ritual. I had spent weeks preparing, studying the Latin phrases and gathering the necessary materials. As the sun began to set, I made my way to the bell tower, carrying a small wooden box containing candles, blessed oil, and a silver knife for the ritual bloodletting. The church was empty and silent as I passed through the nave. No services were scheduled for today. I had made sure of that. This was not something for ordinary worshippers to witness. As I climbed the familiar winding stairs to the bell chamber, I felt a change in the air, a heaviness, a pressure that made my ears pop. The usual musty scent of old stone and wood was tinged with something else, something like ozone after a lightning strike. The north bell was waiting for me, hanging motionless in its housing. In the fading light, I could see a faint blue luminescence playing across its surface, tracing the inscribed symbols. I set my box on the small table I placed in the chamber and began to arrange the items for the ritual. According to the journal, I needed to anoint the bell with oil at specific points corresponding to cardinal directions, then let 7 drops of blood fall upon its rim while reciting the binding words. As I worked, the light outside dimmed rapidly, darkness falling over the churchyard like a heavy curtain. Through the tower window, I could see a thin crescent moon rising, partly obscured by clouds. When everything was ready, I lit the 7 black candles in a circle around me. Their flames burned unnaturally straight, without even the slightest flicker despite the draft that always moved through the tower. I dipped my finger in the blessed oil and approached the north bell. As I traced the first symbol on its western face, I felt a tremor run through the metal, as if the bell were shuddering at my touch. "Be still," I murmured, continuing the pattern. The binding holds. The gate remains closed. I had just finished the 4th symbol on the northern face when I heard it, a soft weeping sound coming from within the bell itself. Not the agonized wailing of that first night, but something more insidious. Something designed to evoke sympathy. "Help us," a voice whispered, childlike and frightened. "We're trapped. Please let us out." I steeled myself against it. The journal had warned about this, the entity's attempts to manipulate through false appeals to compassion. "Your tricks won't work," I said firmly, moving to the eastern face to continue the anointing. The weeping changed, becoming deeper, more masculine. "Daniel," it said in a voice that sounded disturbingly like my father's. "Son, is that you? I can't find my way out of this darkness. Please help me." My hand trembled, nearly smearing the oil pattern. My father had died 3 years ago after a long illness. The entity was pulling this from my memories, my fears. "You are not him," I said through gritted teeth. "You never will be." As I finished the final symbol on the southern face, the temperature in the bell chamber plummeted. My breath clouded before me, and the candle flames turned an eerie blue. "You don't have to be alone," the voice whispered, changing again to something seductive and feminine. "I can give you companionship. Love. Everything you've sacrificed by taking on this burden." I removed the silver knife from its velvet wrapping. "I'm not alone," I replied, thinking of Father William's occasional visits, of the villagers who nodded respectfully when I passed, of my clients who still valued my work. And what I've given up was freely offered. I pressed the knife to my scarred palm and made a careful incision along the permanent line. Blood welled up immediately, bright red in the candlelight. "Wait," the voice cried, all pretense dropping away, revealing something ancient and cold and terrified. "There is another way. Release me, and I will give you knowledge beyond human understanding. Power beyond mortal limits. Freedom from death itself." I held my bleeding palm over the bell's rim. 1, I counted as the first drop fell, sizzling against the metal. The bell began to vibrate, a low-hum building in the air. 2, another drop. The windows rattled in their frames. 3, the candle flame shot higher, turning from blue to a deep purple. You fool, the voice raged. 3 centuries from now, another will come. Someone weaker. Someone who will listen. 4, the air in the chamber swirled violently, forming a vortex around the bell. 5, papers scattered from the table, dancing in the whirlwind. 6, the humming reached a painful intensity, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. This isn't over, the voice howled, now a cacophony of countless voices merged together. It will never be over. 7, I finished, as the final drop of blood struck the bell. I began reciting the Latin phrases from the journal, words of binding and containment that felt ancient even as they left my lips. With each phrase, the chaos in the chamber diminished. The wind died down. The humming faded. The candle flames returned to normal. When I spoke the final word, a profound silence fell over the tower. The north bell gave a single, clear toll, not the distorted sound of an imprisoned entity, but the pure note of consecrated bronze performing its proper function. It was done. The binding was renewed for another year. I bandaged my hand and began cleaning up the ritual implements. As I worked, I became aware of a presence behind me. Father William's ghost had appeared, more solid and clear than I had ever seen him. "Well done," he said simply. "Will it always be like this?" I asked. "Fighting the same battle year after year?" The ghost considered for a moment. "Not necessarily. There may be a way to strengthen the binding permanently. I've been researching from my side of the veil." This was new. "What have you found?" "The bell was not the first prison," Father William explained. "Before the church was built, there was a stone circle here with runes of binding carved into each monolith. Some of those stones were used in the church foundation. If they could be located and the runes reactivated." Hope flickered within me. That might end this cycle? Permanently? Perhaps. But it would require excavation beneath the church. Careful study of the original binding methods. Work that would take years. I nodded slowly. "Then I'd better get started." The ghost smiled sadly. "It will not be easy, and you may not live to see it completed." "Then I'll find someone to continue after me," I replied. Someone prepared for the responsibility, not someone tricked or coerced. I thought of the historical society, of the serious graduate students who sometimes visited to study the church architecture. Surely among them I could find a worthy successor when the time came. Father William's form was already fading, his task for this night complete. "Until next time, guardian," he whispered as he disappeared. Alone again, I finished gathering my things and prepared to descend from the tower. Through the window, I could see the crescent moon now fully visible, casting silver light over the quiet churchyard. Tomorrow, I would begin researching the stone circle that had preceded the church. I would map the foundations, looking for signs of the ancient monoliths. It would be slow work, painstaking and methodical, but I had time. And I had purpose. As I closed the bell chamber door behind me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. This was not the life I had imagined for myself, but perhaps it was the one I was meant to have all along. In the darkness below, the church waited, both sanctuary and prison, both blessed and cursed. Like me. I descended the winding stairs, each step taking me further from the bound entity but never truly away from it. This was my charge now, my responsibility, my bell to tend, until the final toll. Can the dead speak to us, or is it merely our guilt giving voice to our deepest fears? The first time I walked into St. Augustine's Church, I knew something wasn't right. The massive wooden doors creaked open with reluctance, as if warning me to turn back while I still could. But I had a job to do. As the new caretaker, I was responsible for documenting the architectural features of this abandoned church before its scheduled demolition next month. My name is Daniel Thorne, and I've always been drawn to forgotten places. Something about the stillness, the history trapped within crumbling walls speaks to me. My colleagues at the Historical Preservation Society think I'm odd for preferring to work alone, but I find human interaction draining. Places like St. Augustine's, they never demand anything from you. They simply exist, holding their secrets close. The autumn sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the dusty floor. The pews stood in silent rows, their wood warped and worn from decades of neglect. I set my equipment bag down, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. Perfect, I whispered, pulling out my camera. But as the word left my lips, something shifted in the air. Not a sound precisely, but a change in pressure, as if the building had taken a breath. I froze, my finger hovering over the camera's power button. The hair on my arm stood up despite the warm September day. A faint scent drifted through the air, incense mixed with something darker, something earthy and damp. Just old building smells, I reasoned, ignoring the unease crawling up my spine. I began photographing the ornate ceiling, the damaged frescoes, the stone altar. My footsteps echoed as I moved methodically through the nave. When I reached the chancel, I noticed dark stains on the floor beneath the altar. Water damage, most likely, though the pattern seemed oddly deliberate. As I knelt to examine it closer, I heard it, a whisper, so soft I might have imagined it. Help us. I jerked upright, nearly dropping my camera. Hello? My voice bounced off the walls, coming back to me distorted. Is someone here? Silence answered me. The church suddenly felt colder, the air heavier. I turned slowly, scanning the empty pews, the shadowed corners, the balcony overhead. Nothing. You're working too hard, I told myself. Those restoration projects are getting to you. I continued my work, though my hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my camera settings. The rational part of my mind insisted I was alone, but some primal instinct screamed otherwise. Hours passed as I worked my way through the church, documenting every architectural detail. The sunlight gradually shifted, withdrawing its warmth and leaving the interior in deepening shadow. I turned on my flashlight, creating harsh contrasts that transformed familiar shapes into menacing silhouettes. I was photographing the confessional when I heard it again, not a whisper this time, but a sob. Soft, broken, filled with despair. Hello? I called, louder this time. I'm the caretaker. The church is closed. The crying stopped abruptly. Then, from the direction of the altar, came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, light, hesitant, like someone trying to move quietly. Look, I can hear you, I said, my voice strained. This is private property. You need to leave. The footsteps continued, then stopped. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw nothing but empty space where the sound had been. A chill ran through me. I decided to check out the sound, heading toward the altar. My footsteps sounded obscenely loud in the silence. As I approached, I noticed something odd. The dark stains I'd seen earlier seemed to have spread. I crouched down, shining my light directly on the floor. What I had dismissed as water damage now looked disturbingly like blood, forming a pattern that resembled a handprint. A large handprint, stretched and distorted. "This isn't funny," I said to the empty church, but my voice betrayed me, cracking on the last word. That's when the whispering began in earnest, multiple voices now, unintelligible yet urgent, seeming to come from all directions at once. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls, catching nothing but dust motes and shadows. "Who's there?" I demanded, backing toward the exit. The temperature plunged suddenly, my breath forming clouds in the air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, though I still couldn't make out the words. The stained glass windows began to tremble in their frames, a low vibration that I could feel through my shoes. Something touched my shoulder, a light, brief contact, cold as ice through my jacket. I ran. I didn't care about my equipment or my professional reputation. Primal fear took over, sending me bolting down the center aisle toward those massive wooden doors, which wouldn't open. I pushed, pulled, threw my weight against them. Nothing. The doors that had opened so easily hours before were now sealed shut, as if fused to their frame. "Let me out!" I shouted, pounding my fists against the unyielding wood. Behind me, the whispers had become a chorus, still indistinct but unmistakably human. Voices filled with pain, with longing, with rage. I turned slowly, my back pressed against the doors. The church interior had transformed in the fading light. Shadows seemed to move independently of any light source, flowing like liquid across the walls and ceiling. And in the center of the nave, directly beneath the crucifix, stood a figure. It was barely visible, more absence of light than presence, a human silhouette with edges that blurred and shifted. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark void where features should be. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The figure didn't move, yet somehow it seemed to be getting closer, the darkness around it spreading like spilled ink. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, not gradually fading, but there one moment absent the next. The whispering ceased. The doors behind me gave way without warning, sending me tumbling backward onto the stone steps outside. I scrambled to my feet and ran to my car, not looking back, not stopping until I was locked inside with the engine running. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. As I pulled away from St. Augustine's, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The church stood silent and dark against the twilight sky, looking perfectly ordinary, perfectly harmless. Except for the face watching me from the bell tower window, a pale oval with hollows where the eyes should be. I drove away, tires squealing on the pavement, already knowing I would have to return. Not just because my equipment was still inside, but because something in that chorus of whispers had spoken my name. They were waiting for me. And somehow, I knew they had been waiting for a very long time. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faceless figure standing beneath the crucifix, felt the phantom touch on my shoulder. Worse still was the memory of those whispers saying my name, not Daniel, but my childhood name, Danny. A name I hadn't used in 20 years. By morning, exhaustion had dulled the edge of my fear, allowing rationality to creep back in. There had to be logical explanations, wind through broken windows creating strange acoustics, homeless people seeking shelter, my own imagination, fueled by the atmosphere of abandonment and decay. I called my supervisor, Victoria, and made up a story about feeling ill and leaving my equipment behind. She was understanding but firm. The documentation needed to be completed this week. The demolition crew wouldn't wait. "I can send Jeremy instead," she offered. "No," I said too quickly. "I mean, I'm feeling better now. I'll go back today." Why did I say that? Some part of me needed to prove the previous day's events were nothing supernatural. Just tricks of light and sound in an old building. Nothing more. So by early afternoon, I found myself once again standing before St. Augustine's imposing facade. The church looked different in the harsh daylight, less menacing, more pitiful, like an elderly person forgotten by family. The stone exterior was weathered, ivy climbing the walls like nature reclaiming what humans had abandoned. My hands trembled slightly as I pushed open the heavy doors. They swung inward without resistance, no sign of having been stuck the previous evening. I stepped inside, half expecting to be greeted by whispers or that strange cold pressure in the air. Instead, there was only silence and the musty smell of neglect. My equipment bag sat exactly where I'd left it, undisturbed. "Hello?" I called out, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Is anyone here?" Nothing. Just the hollow echo of my own voice bouncing back at me. I walked to the altar, steeling myself for what I might find. The stains I'd seen were still there, but in daylight they looked less like blood and more like the result of a leaking roof. No handprint. No spreading pattern. "You're losing it, Danny boy," I muttered to myself, then froze. I hadn't called myself that since childhood. A soft thud from the back of the church made me whirl around. A hymnal had fallen from one of the pews onto the floor, its pages splayed open. I approached it slowly, scanning the empty church. No draft I could detect, no one who could have knocked it over. I crouched down to pick it up, and as my fingers touched the leather cover, I noticed the page it had fallen open to. Hymn number 27, "Abide with Me." My mother's favorite. The hymn we sang at her funeral when I was 10 years old. A coincidence? It had to be. I returned the book to the pew and resumed my work, forcing myself to focus on the technical aspects, aperture settings, lighting angles, documenting the architectural details that would soon be lost forever. The mechanical process calmed me, creating a buffer between myself and the unease that lingered like static electricity in the air. An hour passed uneventfully. I began to relax, moving through the space with growing confidence. The church was just a building after all. Empty. Abandoned. Waiting for the wrecking ball. Then I found the door. It was hidden behind a tapestry in the transept, a small wooden door, medieval in design, with iron hinges black with age. I was certain it hadn't been on the building plans Victoria had given me. Professional curiosity overcame caution. I twisted the handle, surprised when it turned easily. The door swung open to reveal a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward into darkness. I hesitated only briefly before switching on my flashlight and beginning the descent. The air grew colder with each step, carrying that same earthy dampness I noticed yesterday, only stronger now. The staircase curved tightly, the ceiling so low I had to duck my head. After perhaps 20 steps, I emerged into what appeared to be a crypt. My flashlight beam revealed stone walls lined with niches, some containing decaying wooden coffins, others empty. The floor was covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed save for my own footprints. "This wasn't in the records," I whispered, my breath visible in the cold air. I moved deeper into the crypt, photographing the space. According to the documentation, St. Augustine's had no burial chambers. The dead were supposedly interred in the cemetery behind the church. Yet here was evidence to the contrary. In the center of the crypt stood a stone table, an altar of sorts, but cruder than the one above. Dark stains marred its surface, reminiscent of those beneath the main altar. As I approached it, the air seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin. My flashlight flickered, the beam weakening momentarily before stabilizing. That's when I heard it. A woman's voice, soft and clear. They wouldn't let me rest. I spun around, nearly dropping my camera. The crypt appeared empty, but the voice had been so close, so distinct, not a whisper this time, but words spoken directly behind me. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. The temperature dropped suddenly, my exhalations forming dense clouds. The beam of my flashlight seemed to dull, the darkness pressing in around the circle of illumination. They performed rituals, the voice continued, now seeming to come from the direction of the altar. Used our pain to feed their god. I turned slowly, training my light on the stone table. For an instant, just the briefest moment, I thought I saw a woman lying there, her dress stained dark around and wound in her chest, her eyes wide and staring directly at me. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on an uneven stone. As I fell, my flashlight struck the floor and went out, plunging the crypt into absolute darkness. Panic surged through me. I scrambled to find the flashlight, my hands sweeping across the cold stone floor. My fingers brushed something soft instead, fabric, I thought, or perhaps hair. "Who are you?" the voice asked, now directly beside my ear. "Why have you come here?" My throat constricted. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The darkness pressed against my eyes like a physical weight. "They're still here, you know," the voice whispered. "Those who did this to us. They never left." My hand closed around the flashlight. I struck it against my palm repeatedly until it flickered back to life. The weak beam revealed nothing unusual, no woman, no sign of anyone besides myself. But when I looked down at my hands, they were smeared with something dark and wet. I bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time despite the low ceiling that scraped against my scalp. I burst through the door into the main church, gasping for breath, heart hammering against my ribs. The church was no longer empty. Figures stood in the shadows between the columns, indistinct, wavering like heat mirages, but unmistakably human in shape. They seemed to watch me, though I could discern no faces, no features at all. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The figures didn't move, didn't respond. But the air filled with that same whispering from yesterday, dozens of voices speaking over each other, creating a tapestry of sound I couldn't decipher. I backed toward the main doors, never taking my eyes off the shadowy figures. They didn't follow, but they didn't need to. Something told me they could find me wherever I went. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the church grounds. I leaned against my car, trying to calm my racing heart. When I looked at my hands again, they were clean, no trace of the dark substance from the crypt. But I knew what I had felt, knew what I had seen. St. Augustine's was not empty. It had never been empty. And whatever dwelled there knew my name, knew things about me no stranger could possibly know. As I drove away, a certainty settled over me, cold and heavy as a burial shroud. I would have to return. Not just for my job, but because whatever had begun in that church could not be left unfinished. The dead of St. Augustine's had found their voice. And for some reason, they had chosen me to listen. That night, I dreamed of the church. In my dream, it wasn't abandoned but filled with worshippers, men and women in antiquated clothing, their faces serious as they sang hymns that sounded more like dirges. At the altar stood a priest, his back to the congregation, speaking words in a language I didn't understand. I moved among them, unnoticed, a ghost among the living, or perhaps they were the ghosts. As I approached the front of the church, the priest slowly turned. Where his face should have been was only shadow, a void that seemed to pull at me like gravity. I awoke gasping, sheets twisted around my legs, the alarm clock glowing 3:17 in the darkness. Sleep refused to return. Instead, I found myself at my laptop, researching St. Augustine's Church. The building had been constructed in 1873, serving as the spiritual center for the surrounding community until it was closed in 1962 due to dwindling attendance. It had briefly reopened in the 1980s as a community center before being abandoned entirely in 1991. Nothing unusual. Nothing to explain what I had experienced. I dug deeper, searching local newspaper archives. Most mentions of the church were mundane, holiday services, marriages, fundraisers. But then I found something, a small article from October 1899 describing the mysterious disappearance of 5 parishioners over the course of a month. The piece quoted the priest, Father Thomas Blackwood, claiming the missing individuals had simply moved away. The article ended with a quote from a local woman, "There are whispers in that church. Voices that shouldn't be there." My skin prickled. I searched for follow-up articles but found nothing conclusive, just a brief mention that the missing persons cases remained unsolved. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but my mind hummed with nervous energy. I called Victoria and told her I needed another day to complete the documentation. "Is everything all right, Daniel?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "You sound terrible." "Just not sleeping well," I admitted. "Old buildings get to me sometimes." "You've never had a problem before. Should I really send someone else?" "No," I insisted. "I need to finish this myself." After hanging up, I questioned my own stubbornness. Why was I so determined to return to a place that terrified me? Yet some part of me needed answers, needed to understand what was happening in that church and why I seemed connected to it. I spent the morning gathering supplies, extra batteries for my flashlight, a digital voice recorder, a more powerful camera with night vision capabilities. If something supernatural was occurring at St. Augustine's, I wanted evidence. I also stopped at the local library to access their physical archives, hoping to find information too old to be digitized. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Winters, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned St. Augustine's. "Nasty business, that place," she said, her voice lowered though we were alone in the reference section. "My grandmother used to talk about it. Said there was a secret society that met there after hours. Not good Christians, if you take my meaning." "What kind of secret society?" I asked. She shook her head. Gran wouldn't say much. Just that they practiced old ways, pre-Christian stuff. Said people who got too curious about them had a habit of disappearing. She directed me to a collection of local history books, but they contained little beyond what I already knew. As I was about to leave, she touched my arm. "Be careful in that place," she said, her eyes serious behind thick glasses. "Some buildings hold on to things that happened inside them. Bad things." The warning followed me as I drove to the church in the late afternoon. The sky had darkened with approaching storm clouds, fitting my mood perfectly. St. Augustine's loomed against the gray sky, its stone facade seeming to absorb what little light remained. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my courage. The rational part of my brain still insisted there must be explanations for what I'd experienced: acoustics, a transient seeking shelter, my own imagination amplified by the setting. Yet that rational voice was growing fainter with each encounter. Finally, I grabbed my bag and approached the church. The doors opened as easily as they had yesterday, swinging inward with that same reluctant creak. The interior was bathed in gray light filtered through dust-covered windows. I stood just inside the entrance, listening. Nothing but the soft patter of rain beginning to fall outside. "I know you're here," I said to the empty church, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I want to understand what happened to you." No response. Just the hollow echo of my own voice. I moved deeper into the church, setting up my equipment methodically. The digital recorder went on the altar, the night vision camera on a tripod aimed at the nave. I took out my flashlight but didn't turn it on yet. The fading daylight was still sufficient. As I worked, I spoke aloud, explaining what I was doing, inviting any presence to communicate. The silence that followed each question felt watchful rather than empty. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the roof and windows. Water began to leak through the ceiling in places, droplets falling to the stone floor with rhythmic taps. One leak directly above the altar sent water streaming down the ancient crucifix, creating an illusion of tears on the carved face of Christ. I finished setting up as darkness fell in earnest. Switching on my flashlight, I moved to the hidden door I discovered yesterday. The crypt called to me, though everything in my body screamed to stay away. The narrow staircase seemed longer than before, the darkness at the bottom more absolute. My flashlight beam barely penetrated it, as if the darkness were a physical substance rather than an absence of light. I paused on the last step, listening. Was that breathing I heard, soft, irregular breathing from the depths of the crypt? "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. The breathing stopped. A heavy silence settled, broken only by water dripping somewhere in the distance. I stepped into the crypt, sweeping my flashlight across the space. The stone altar stood in the center, exactly as I remembered it. The dark stains seemed more pronounced now, glistening wetly in the light. Movement caught my eye, a shadow darting between two burial niches. I spun, training my light on the spot, but saw nothing. "I know you're here," I said again. "Please, I want help." A whisper from behind me, "You can't help us." I turned slowly. A woman stood beside the altar, not fully materialized, but more substantial than the shadows I'd seen before. She wore a high-neck dress from another century, her hair pulled back severely from a pale face. Most disturbing were her eyes, dark hollows that seemed to reflect no light. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Eleanor," she said, her lips moving but the sound seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Eleanor Matthews. I died here in 1899. One of the missing parishioners from the newspaper article. What happened to you?" I managed to ask. Her form flickered like a candle flame. "They sacrificed us. Used our deaths to feed their power." "Who did?" "The inner circle," she whispered. "Led by him. The shepherd who fed his flock to wolves. Father Blackwood?" I guessed, remembering the name from the article. Her expression changed, anger or fear, I couldn't tell which. "Do not speak his name here." He listened still. As if in response to her warning, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me, and the flashlight dimmed, nearly going out entirely. Eleanor's form became more transparent. You must leave, she urged. He knows you're here. He's coming. I want to understand, I insisted. Why me? Why am I seeing this? Blood calls to blood, she said, her voice fading. The circle must be broken. Before I could ask what she meant, she vanished, not gradually but all at once, like a candle snuffed out. In the same instant, my flashlight died completely. The darkness pressed against me, absolute and suffocating. Then I heard it, footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps descending toward the crypt. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with the flashlight, striking it against my palm, but it remained dead. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied now by a low humming, a man's voice, singing or chanting something in words I couldn't understand. I backed away, bumping into the wall behind me. My hand encountered the cold stone of a burial niche. Without thinking, I hoisted myself into it, pressing my body as far back as possible, praying the darkness would hide me. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Though I could see nothing, I sensed a presence entering the crypt, something that displaced the air, creating pressure against my eardrums. The humming grew louder, resolving into words that sounded Latin but distorted, corrupted somehow. A light appeared, not electric but the orange glow of flame. It illuminated a figure standing by the altar, tall and thin, wearing what appeared to be clerical robes. The face remained in shadow beneath a hood, but I could feel its gaze sweeping the chamber. I pressed myself harder against the stone, trying to control my breathing. The figure set something on the altar, a book, I thought, ancient and bound in dark leather. I know you're here, a voice said, male, resonant, with an accent I couldn't place. I can smell your fear. Your blood. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain he must hear it. The figure lifted his hand, and the flame he carried grew brighter, illuminating more of the crypt. You are of the bloodline, he continued. That's why they revealed themselves to you. But you don't understand what you've stumbled into. What power waits beneath this sacred place? He moved around the altar, coming closer to my hiding place. I caught a glimpse of his face beneath the hood, gaunt, pale, with eyes that reflected the flame like a cat's. Come out, he coaxed. Join us. Your ancestor did, before his conscience turned him traitor. My ancestor? What was he talking about? The flame grew brighter still, casting my shadow against the wall behind me. He had seen me. There was no use hiding anymore. I launched myself from the niche, aiming for the stairs. He moved with impossible speed, blocking my path. The flame in his hand flared, revealing his face fully for the first time. It wasn't human, not entirely. The features were stretched, elongated, the skin so pale it was nearly translucent, showing the dark network of veins beneath. But worse were the eyes, entirely black, with no whites visible. I stumbled backward, a scream locked in my throat. The figure smiled, revealing teeth too sharp, too numerous. Blood of my blood, he said. You've come home at last. The flame in his hand surged upward, engulfing his arm without burning it. The fire cast writhing shadows across the walls, shadows that moved independently, reaching toward me with elongated fingers. I backed away until I hit the altar. The book lay open, its pages covered in symbols that seemed to crawl across the parchment like insects. The figure advanced, the fire spreading to encompass his entire body now, a walking inferno that cast no heat. Your blood will complete the ritual, he said, his voice no longer human but a chorus of voices speaking in unison. The circle will be complete. My hand landed on something on the altar beside the book, cold metal, sharp-edged. Without looking, I grabbed it and swung blindly as the figure lunged toward me. The object, a ceremonial dagger, passed through the flaming form as if through smoke. The figure laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "You cannot harm me with the tools of my own craft," it said. Desperate, I clutched the dagger tighter and did the only thing that came to mind. I dragged the blade across my palm, drawing blood. "Blood calls to blood," I gasped, remembering Eleanor's words. The effect was immediate and shocking. The figure recoiled as if struck, the flames surrounding it flickering wildly. The shadows on the walls writhed more violently, and a howl rose from somewhere deep beneath the crypt, a sound of rage and pain. I took advantage of the distraction, darting past the figure toward the stairs. As I reached them, I glanced back. The flames around the figure had diminished, revealing something beneath the human appearance, something ancient and terrible. "Run if you must," it called after me, voice echoing strangely. "But you are marked now. We will find you wherever you go." I took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the main church. To my horror, the shadowy congregation had returned, dozens of figures standing in the pews, all turned toward me. But now I could see their faces, or what remained of them, hollow-eyed, mouths open in silent screams. They parted as I ran down the center aisle, creating a path to the doors. Behind me, I heard the thing from the crypt ascending the stairs, the unnatural flame casting long shadows before it. I reached the doors and pushed through them into the pouring rain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the churchyard for an instant, revealing dozens of figures standing among the gravestones, watching me with the same hollow eyes as those inside. I ran to my car, blood from my cut palm smearing the door handle as I wrenched it open. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, tires skidding on the wet pavement. In my rearview mirror, I saw the church doors standing open, flames flickering in the darkness beyond them. And silhouetted against that unholy light, a tall figure stood watching my retreat. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind, "Blood calls to blood. The circle must be broken." What circle? What did my blood have to do with the horrors in St. Augustine's? And most terrifying of all, what had the creature meant when it called me blood of my blood? I drove through the storm, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the church. But deep down, I knew I couldn't escape what had been set in motion. Whatever connection existed between me and St. Augustine's, it transcended physical distance. The horror had found me. And somehow, I knew it was only the beginning. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The creature's words, "We will find you wherever you go," haunted me. Instead, I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash and using a false name. Paranoia, perhaps, but after what I'd witnessed, caution seemed reasonable. In the harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom, I examined my injured palm. The cut wasn't deep, but it continued to seep blood despite my attempts to clean and bandage it. More disturbing were the edges of the wound, which had turned black, as if infected. My phone showed 12 missed calls from Victoria. I couldn't face explaining my absence to her yet. What would I say? That I'd been attacked by a supernatural entity in a church crypt? That apparently I shared blood with whatever unholy thing lurked there? Sleep eluded me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the television playing at low volume, providing background noise to fill the silence. Around 3 in the morning, I finally turned to the only lead I had, my family history. My parents had died when I was young, my father in a car accident when I was 8, my mother from cancer 2 years later. I'd been raised by my maternal grandmother, who rarely spoke of our family's past. When she died during my college years, I inherited a house full of belongings I'd mostly kept in storage, too busy with my career to sort through the remnants of a family I barely remembered. Now I call the one person who might have answers, my father's sister, Aunt Rebecca. Despite the hour, she answered on the third ring, her voice alert. "Daniel? What's wrong?" I hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. "I'm sorry to call so late. I've been researching our family history for a project and had some questions." At 3 in the morning? She sounded skeptical. "What's really going on?" I took a deep breath. "Does the name St. Augustine's Church mean anything to you? Or Father Thomas Blackwood?" The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Where did you hear those names?" My pulse quickened. "It's connected to our family somehow, isn't it?" "Daniel, listen to me," she said, her tone urgent now. "Stay away from that church. Don't ask questions about it. Some family histories are better left buried." "I need to know, Aunt Rebecca. I've seen things there." "You've been inside?" She cut me off, voice sharp with alarm. "Dear God, Daniel, tell me you haven't been inside that place." "I have," I admitted. "For work. I'm documenting it before demolition." Another long silence. Then, "I'm coming to you." "Where are you staying?" I gave her the motel information, and she promised to arrive by noon the next day. Before hanging up, she added, "Don't go back to that church. Not for any reason. And Daniel, check the salt lines at your door and windows." "Salt lines?" I repeated, confused. "Just do it," she said, then ended the call. I sat in stunned silence, her reaction confirming my worst fears. Whatever connection existed between my family and St. Augustine's, it was significant enough to terrify a woman I'd always known as fearless. Following her strange advice, I checked the door and window sills in my motel room. No salt, of course. I retrieved a small container from my bag. I packed it for food, not protection, and poured lines across each threshold. I felt foolish doing it, but after everything I'd experienced, I wasn't taking chances. Dawn arrived without incident, gray light seeping through the thin curtains. I showered, the hot water providing momentary relief from the tension in my muscles. The cut on my palm had stopped bleeding but now resembled a brand more than a wound, a dark line etched into my skin that throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I forced myself to eat from the vending machine, though food held little appeal. My phone buzzed with another call from Victoria, which I finally answered. "Daniel, where are you?" Her voice was sharp with concern. "The demolition crew needs those final photographs today." "I can't go back there," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I hesitated, weighing how much to tell her. "The church isn't safe, Victoria. There's something there, something dangerous." "What are you talking about?" "It's an empty building." "It's not empty," I insisted. "Trust me on this. Don't send anyone else there either." She was silent for a moment. "You sound not like yourself." "I'm worried about you." "I'll explain everything later," I promised. "But please, delay the demolition if you can. Just for a few days." She agreed reluctantly, and I ended the call feeling marginally better. At least no one else would enter St. Augustine's immediately. Around 11, there was a knock at my door. Cautious, I peered through the peephole to see Aunt Rebecca standing in the dim hallway. She looked older than when I'd last seen her at Christmas 2 years ago, her once dark hair now completely gray, new lines etched around her eyes and mouth. I opened the door, relief flooding through me at the sight of a familiar face. She stepped over the salt line without disturbing it, her eyes taking in the precaution with grim approval. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting, setting down a large leather bag. "It's been a rough few days." She took my injured hand without asking, examining the cut with narrowed eyes. "You bled in the church." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Damn it, Daniel," she whispered, but there was more sadness than anger in her voice. "Let me see your eyes." Confused, I leaned forward as she peered intently into my eyes, looking for something. Whatever she saw made her shoulders slump. "It started, then," she said, releasing my hand and moving to sit heavily on the edge of the bed. "I had hoped, but it doesn't matter now." "What started?" I demanded. "What do you know about St. Augustine's?" She looked up at me, her expression resolving into determination. "Everything. I know everything about the cursed place and what happened there." "What's still happening there?" She patted the bed beside her. "Sit down. This will take some time." I sat, and she began a story that would forever change how I understood my family and myself. "Your great-great-grandfather was Joseph Thorne," she said. "He came to this country in 1865, fleeing something in England. He never spoke of what, but he carried with him ancient books and artifacts that should have been destroyed." She opened her bag and removed a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This was his. I've kept it hidden since your father died. He made me promise never to show it to you unless absolutely necessary." She handed it to me. The journal was heavier than it looked, the leather cover warm to the touch despite the cool room. Opening it revealed pages of cramped handwriting in faded ink, interspersed with diagrams and symbols that made my skin crawl, similar to those I'd seen in the book on the altar. "Joseph was what we now call an occultist," Rebecca continued. "He believed he could commune with forces beyond our world, bend them to his will. In 1873, he helped found St. Augustine's Church." "It was built as a church?" I asked, looking up from the journal. She laughed bitterly. "A church on the outside. Something else entirely beneath. The building was constructed over much older foundations, a site where pagan rituals had been performed centuries earlier. Joseph and his circle believed the location held power they could harness." I remembered the crypt, the stone altar. "They performed sacrifices." Rebecca nodded grimly. "Not at first. Initially, they practiced what they considered benign rituals, seeking knowledge, wealth, power. But such forces demand payment. When their initial offerings proved insufficient, they turned to blood sacrifice. Animals at first, then people," I finished. "The missing parishioners from 1899. She looked startled. "You've been researching." "And seen things," I admitted. "Spirits. One called herself Eleanor Matthews." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. "The first victim. A young widow who caught Joseph's eye. Her disappearance sparked questions the others couldn't easily dismiss. What happened to them? The circle, I mean. Most died mysteriously in the early 1900s. Heart failure, sudden illness, accidents, deaths that seemed natural but came too conveniently." She hesitated. "Except for Joseph. And Father Blackwood." The priest mentioned in the newspaper, I said. But he wasn't really a priest, was he? Oh, he was ordained, which made his fall all the more terrible. Thomas Blackwood was brilliant, charismatic. He believed they were communicating with angels, higher powers. By the time he realized the truth, it was too late. They had already invited something through. A chill ran through me. What did they invite? Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. They never knew its true name. They called it the Shepherd of Shadows. An entity that feeds on suffering on the moment when life transitions to death. The rituals bound it to the church, but also bound the circle to it. Their bloodlines. Our bloodline. I remembered the creature's words, blood of my blood. It claimed I was related to it, I said quietly. Rebecca nodded. Not by choice. When Joseph realized what they'd done, what Blackwood had become, he tried to stop the rituals. But blood oaths aren't easily broken. The entity marked him, as it's now marked you. She gestured to my wounded palm. The bond passes through generations, dormant until awakened. Awakened how? Blood freely given in its domain, she said. You cut yourself in the church, didn't you? I nodded, remembering the desperate act that had allowed me to escape. That both repelled and bound it to you, she explained. Our blood carries power over it. Joseph made sure of that before he died, but also connects us to it. It's how the entity has survived all these years, feeding on the energy of that connection, waiting for one of us to return. But why me? Why now? Every 5 generations, the connection grows stronger. You're the 5th generation from Joseph, Daniel. The entity has been waiting for you specifically. My mind reeled with the implications. What does it want from me? Freedom, she said simply. The rituals bound it to the church grounds, but with your blood, willingly given by the 5th generation, it could break those bonds. That's why your father kept you away from that place. Why we both did. But I had no idea any of this existed until 3 days ago, I protested. Exactly. Your father wanted it that way. After his older brother died. I didn't know Dad had a brother, I interrupted. Rebecca's expression darkened. Michael. He was curious about the family history, like you. Found references to St. Augustine's in old papers and went exploring when he was 17. They found his body in the cemetery behind the church. Official cause of death was exposure, but... She trailed off, eyes distant with painful memories. The entity got him, I finished. She nodded. Your father destroyed every reference to the church in our family records after that. Changed our last name from Thornwell back to the original Thorn. Did everything he could to break the connection. Then he died too, I said quietly. The car accident wasn't an accident, Daniel, she said, voice tight with old grief. John felt the pull growing stronger as you approached adolescence. He went to the church to confront it, to make some kind of bargain to protect you. He never told me exactly what happened there, but he died 3 days later. My throat constricted. All these years, I believed my father's death was random tragedy. To learn it was connected to this horror that he had died trying to protect me. And Mom? Did she know about any of this? Rebecca shook her head. John never told her. He wanted to keep both of you safe through ignorance. After he died, I considered telling you the truth when you turned 18, but you seemed so removed from all of it. You never showed any interest in family history, never felt drawn to the church. I thought perhaps the connection had finally broken. Until I took the documentation job, I said bitterly. The universe has a cruel sense of irony, she agreed. Of all the historic buildings in this city, you had to be assigned that one. I stood and paced the small room, trying to process everything. So what happens now? This entity is connected to me, possibly following me. The church is scheduled for demolition, which might destroy its prison. And apparently I'm the key to setting it free. Or binding it permanently, Rebecca said. I stopped pacing. What? She reached into her bag again and withdrew a smaller book bound in dark blue leather. Joseph left instructions. A ritual to strengthen the bonds holding the entity, using the blood of the 5th generation. He knew this day would come. You want me to perform a ritual? After everything you just told me about what happened to the original circle? This is different, she insisted. This isn't communion with the entity, it's imprisonment. Joseph spent the rest of his life developing this counter-ritual, atoning for his role in releasing it. I took the small book reluctantly. The pages contained diagrams and text in what appeared to be Latin, along with English annotations in the margins. Even if I believed this would work, I said, it would mean going back to the church. Back to that thing. It's the only way, Rebecca said quietly. If the building is demolished without the ritual being performed, the physical anchor holding the entity will be destroyed. It will be free to move beyond the church grounds, to feed more widely. And if I refuse? Just walk away? Her eyes met mine, unflinching. It's already connected to you, Daniel. It knows your blood, your essence. It will follow you, haunt you. And eventually, it will claim you, as it tried to claim Michael, as it claimed your father. The weight of legacy pressed down on me, generations of blood and secrets culminating in this moment, this choice. I thought of Eleanor and the other spirits trapped in St. Augustine's, souls unable to find peace because of what my ancestor had helped unleash. When would we do this ritual? I asked finally. Tonight, Rebecca said. At midnight. The veil between worlds is thin as thin, making both the entity stronger and the binding more effective. I raised an eyebrow. You're coming with me? I've been preparing for this possibility my entire adult life, she said. I'm not born blood, but I was married to it. I can assist, protect. I looked down at the dark line across my palm, throbbing with my pulse. Blood calls to blood. The circle must be broken. We'll need supplies, I said, decision made. And I should call Victoria, tell her to make absolutely certain the demolition crew stays away for another day. Rebecca nodded, relief visible in her eyes. I brought most of what we need. She gestured to her large bag. Joseph was very specific about the requirements. As we began preparations, sorting through ingredients and reviewing the ritual steps, a strange calm settled over me. The terror of previous encounters had transformed into grim determination. This was my inheritance, not just the curse, but the responsibility to end it. By evening, we had everything ready. Rebecca insisted I rest before the confrontation ahead, but sleep remained elusive. Instead, I read through Joseph's journal, trying to understand the man whose actions had set these events in motion generations before my birth. His early entries revealed an idealistic scholar, fascinated by ancient mysteries and convinced that conventional religion had obscured deeper truths. But as the years progressed, his writing grew darker, filled with doubts and eventually horror at what he had helped unleash. The final pages contained his confession and the framework of the binding ritual, written in a shaky hand that suggested illness or extreme distress. To my descendants, I leave this burden and this gift. The blood that connects you to the shepherd is also the key to its permanent imprisonment. The 5th generation must complete what I began. May God forgive us all. As twilight deepened into night, Rebecca and I loaded her car with the ritual supplies. Neither of us spoke much, the weight of what lay ahead settling over us like a shroud. St. Augustine's awaited, its secrets and horrors stirring in the darkness. And somewhere within, the entity that had claimed my family for generations prepared for our arrival. Blood calls to blood. The circle must be broken. Tonight, I would fulfill my ancestors' final wish, or join the congregation of lost souls trapped within those ancient walls. The church looked different at night, more alive somehow, darkness accentuating its Gothic features until it resembled something organic rather than architectural. Moonlight caught on the stained glass windows, making them gleam like watchful eyes. "It knows we're here," Rebecca said quietly as we approached the entrance, carrying bags of supplies. "It's been waiting." My wounded palm throbbed in response, the dark line seeming to pulse with its own heartbeat. The massive wooden doors stood slightly ajar, though I was certain they had been closed when I fled 2 nights before. "Is that part of its invitation?" I asked, nodding toward the opening. "Likely." Rebecca's voice was tight with tension. "It wants you inside. Wants to complete what began when you cut yourself." We paused at the threshold. Rebecca removed a small vial of clear liquid from her pocket, uncorked it, and sprinkled drops across the entrance. "Holy water?" I asked. "Salt water from the tears of a grieving mother," she corrected. "More potent for our purposes." She spoke words under her breath, not Latin, but something older, then nodded to me. "It won't keep the entity out, but it will provide some protection as we work." We stepped inside, the interior illuminated only by our flashlights and the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. The church appeared empty, yet the air felt heavy, charged with expectation. I swept my light across the nave, half expecting to see the congregation of shadows I'd encountered before. Instead, there was only dust and silence. "Down to the crypt," Rebecca directed. "That's where the original rituals were performed, where the binding must take place." We moved toward the hidden door behind the tapestry, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The door swung open at my touch, revealing the narrow stone staircase spiraling downward. "I'll go first," I said, remembering the entity's words, "blood of my blood." The descent seemed longer than before, the darkness at the bottom more absolute. My flashlight beam barely penetrated it, as if the darkness were consuming the light itself. The crypt appeared unchanged, stone walls lined with burial niches, the crude altar standing in the center. Rebecca gasped softly as we entered the space. "You feel it too?" I asked. She nodded grimly. "The veil is thin here. Too many deaths, too much suffering." We set our bags on the floor and began unloading supplies, white candles, bundles of herbs, small cloth pouches filled with various substances, a silver bowl, and finally, an ancient-looking dagger with symbols etched into its blade, similar to the one I'd found on the altar, but clearly much older. "Joseph's ritual dagger," Rebecca explained, seeing my expression. "Passed down through generations, waiting for this moment." We arranged the candles in a specific pattern outlined in Joseph's book, a 5-pointed star with the altar at its center. Rebecca placed the pouches at each point, then sprinkled a mixture of dried herbs and what looked like salt in a circle connecting them. "Now we wait for midnight," she said, checking her watch. 23 minutes. The waiting was excruciating. Every shadow seemed to move in my peripheral vision. Every breath of air against my skin felt like ghostly fingers. The wound on my palm pulsed more intensely with each passing minute. "Tell me about Eleanor," Rebecca said suddenly, breaking the silence. "She spoke to you?" I described my encounter with the spirit, her warning about Father Blackwood, her plea that the circle be broken. Rebecca nodded. "The victims of the original rituals are bound here too, neither fully dead nor at peace. Your blood connection allowed you to see them clearly. They've been waiting for this as long as the entity has, though for very different reasons. Will the ritual free them?" I asked. "If we succeed, yes. Their souls should be released when the entity is fully bound." At exactly 5 minutes to midnight, the temperature in the crypt plummeted. Our breath clouded before us, and the flames of the candles we'd lit bent horizontally, as if blown by an unfelt wind. "It's coming," Rebecca whispered. A low humming filled the air, the same chant I'd heard during my previous encounter. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, vibrating through the stone floor beneath our feet. Rebecca handed me Joseph's book, open to the pages containing the ritual text. "Remember what we practiced. Don't hesitate, don't stop reading no matter what happens or what you see. The entity will try to distract you, to break the ritual." I nodded, taking the book with hands that trembled slightly. The Latin words swam before my eyes, but I memorized most of them during our preparation. The humming grew louder, harmonizing into multiple voices. The shadows between the burial niches deepened, taking on substance and form. Slowly, figures began to materialize around the perimeter of the crypt, the congregation I'd seen before, but clearer now, more defined. Men and women in clothing from different eras, their faces bearing the same hollow-eyed expression of horror. They formed a circle around us, watching silently. "The witnesses," Rebecca murmured. "All those who died here." I spotted Eleanor among them, her pale face solemn as she nodded encouragement to me. Beside her stood others, a young man in clothing from the 1940s, an elderly woman in a dress from the turn of the century, a child no more than 10 in clothes I couldn't date. "How many?" I whispered, horrified by their numbers. "More than the 5 reported missing," Rebecca acknowledged grimly. The rituals continued long after Joseph left the circle. Decades of sacrifices to feed the entity's hunger. The candle flames suddenly flared higher, burning blue-white. The temperature dropped further, frost crystallizing on the stone walls. The ritual circle Rebecca had created began to glow with a faint luminescence. "It's midnight," she said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "Begin now." I opened my mouth to speak the first words of the ritual when a voice interrupted, deep, resonant, and terrifyingly familiar. "Blood of my blood. You've returned to me." At the top of the stairs stood a figure, the same one I'd encountered before, but fully materialized now. Father Blackwood, or what had once been him. He wore clerical robes that might have been black or deep crimson. It was impossible to tell in the strange light. His face retained a semblance of humanity, but the proportions were wrong, features too elongated, skin too pale, eyes entirely black. "Begin the ritual," Rebecca hissed. "Now!" I forced the Latin words past my constricted throat, my voice strengthening with each syllable. The entity remained at the top of the stairs, watching with those bottomless eyes. "You think you can bind me?" it said, its voice overlapping with others, as if multiple beings spoke through one mouth. "Your ancestor tried. He failed. The binding weakens with time, with each death I claim." I continued reading, focusing on the text before me rather than the terror trying to claw its way up my throat. Rebecca moved to stand between me and the entity, her hands raised in a gesture that seemed both protective and commanding. "You have no power here, Shepherd," she called. "This is not your domain." The entity laughed, a sound like breaking glass that seemed to come from all around us rather than from the figure itself. "I have every power here, Widow of Thorn. This place was consecrated to me in blood." It descended one step, and the candle flames flickered wildly. The spectral congregation pressed closer, their expressions changing from solemnity to fear. I raised my voice, the Latin words flowing more confidently now. According to Joseph's instructions, this first part of the ritual acknowledged the entity's existence and named it as bound to this place. The entity's form rippled, as if struggling to maintain its shape. "Stop this foolishness," it commanded, its voice deeper, more resonant. "You cannot comprehend what you're interfering with." I continued without pausing. Rebecca removed a small silver knife from her pocket and turned to me, nodding that it was time for the next phase. Without breaking the recitation, I extended my injured hand. She made a swift cut across the existing wound, reopening it. Blood welled immediately, darker than it should be. Rebecca caught it in the silver bowl we had placed at the center of our ritual circle. The effect on the entity was immediate and violent. It searched down several more steps, its form elongating unnaturally, the priestly robes tearing as something larger tried to emerge. "Your blood is my blood," it roared, the voice no longer remotely human. The walls of the crypt trembled with the force of its rage. Rebecca added ingredients to the bowl containing my blood, herbs, powders, liquids I couldn't identify, all specified in Joseph's notes. She stirred the mixture with her finger, speaking words under her breath that complemented the Latin I continued to recite. The entity reached the bottom of the stairs, its form growing more monstrous with each step. The human disguise was slipping away, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath, a shape that hurt the eyes to look upon directly, with too many limbs and features that seemed to shift and change moment by moment. "I fed your ancestor knowledge beyond mortal understanding," it said, its voice modulating between rage and persuasion. "I can do the same for you. Power, wisdom, life beyond the constraints of your fragile form." The spectral witnesses began to cry out, wordless sounds of anguish and mourning. Eleanor moved to stand near me, her insubstantial form providing a strange comfort despite her terrified expression. "Don't listen," she whispered. "It lies. Always lies." I had reached the crucial part of the ritual, the binding words that would, according to Joseph, strengthen the entity's prison and cut its connection to my bloodline once and for all. But as I spoke the words, doubt crept in. What if Joseph had been wrong? What if this ritual actually weakened the bonds instead of strengthening them? The entity sensed my hesitation. "Yes," it hissed. "You begin to understand. Joseph didn't tell you everything. His ritual is flawed. Incomplete." "Lies," Rebecca snapped. "Keep reading, Daniel." The entity turned its attention to her, and for an instant, its form solidified into something almost human again, but not Father Blackwood this time. Instead, it wore the face of my father. "Rebecca," it said in my father's voice, "you promised to protect him. This ritual will kill him, just as it killed me." Rebecca faltered, her hands trembling above the ritual bowl. "John?" "It's not him," I said sharply, though seeing my father's face after so many years sent pain knifing through my chest. The entity wearing my father's face turned to me. "Son, stop this madness. There's another way." Its eyes, my father's kind brown eyes, pleaded with me. For a moment, I almost believed it was him, reaching from beyond death to save me from a terrible mistake. Then I noticed the darkness gathering around the figure, tendrils of shadow curling like smoke at its feet. Not my father. Never my father. I resumed the ritual with renewed determination, my voice stronger than before. Rebecca shook off her momentary trance and returned to her part of the ceremony, adding the final ingredients to the bowl. The entity roared in fury, abandoning my father's form entirely. It swelled in size, darkness pouring from it like physical matter, filling the crypt with writhing shadows. The candles guttered but didn't extinguish. Your souls will join my collection, it thundered. Your suffering will feed me for eternity. The spectral congregation surged forward as one, placing themselves between us and the entity. Eleanor at their center, her expression fierce despite her evident terror. Finish it, she urged. Set us free. I spoke the final words of the ritual, my voice steady despite the chaos surrounding us. Rebecca lifted the bowl of mixed blood and ingredients, pouring it in a precise pattern on the stone altar. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The entity shrieked, a sound that threatened to shatter my eardrums, as the liquid from the bowl spread across the altar in lines that matched the symbols in Joseph's book, glowing with an inner light that was neither fire nor electricity. The crypt shook violently. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling. The spectral figures flickered like candle flames in a draft. The circle cannot be broken, the entity howled, its form contracting and expanding erratically. Blood calls to blood. Blood ends it, I countered, speaking the final line of the ritual in English rather than Latin. By my blood, freely given, I sever the bond. By my will, freely offered, I strengthen your chains. By my right, as fifth of the line, I command you to your prison for all eternity. The glowing symbols on the altar flared blindingly bright. The entity convulsed, its form imploding into itself, darkness collapsing into a single point of absolute blackness. A sound like the inrush of a massive vacuum filled the crypt, and then silence. The oppressive weight that had filled the air vanished. The temperature began to rise. The candles burned normally again. Where the entity had stood was nothing, not even shadow. Just empty space. The spectral congregation remained, but they too were changing. The hollow, horrified expressions gave way to something like peace. One by one, they began to fade, not vanishing suddenly, but gradually becoming transparent until they were gone. Eleanor was the last to remain. She approached me, her form already growing fainter. Thank you, she whispered, her voice distant as an echo. The circle is broken. We are free. She reached out as if to touch my cheek, her hand passing through me with the faintest sensation of coolness. Then she too was gone. Rebecca and I stood alone in the crypt, surrounded by melting candles and the remnants of our ritual. The cut on my palm no longer throbbed with that unnatural pulse. It was just a wound now, already beginning to heal. Is it over? I asked, my voice hoarse from the ritual chanting. Rebecca looked around, her experienced eyes searching for any sign that our work had been incomplete. Finally, she nodded. It's bound permanently now. The connection to your blood, to our family, is severed. She touched the altar, which had absorbed the ritual mixture completely, leaving no trace. This place will always hold darkness, but the entity itself is imprisoned beyond its reach. We gathered our supplies in weary silence, the aftermath of terror and adrenaline leaving us drained. As we climbed the stairs back to the main church, I noticed changes already occurring. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted. The air smelled simply of dust and neglect, not that unnatural earthy dampness. St. Augustine's was just a building again, old, abandoned, waiting for demolition. Outside, dawn was breaking, the first hints of light touching the eastern horizon. We stood on the steps, watching as the church's shadow retreated with the advancing sunlight. "What happens now?" I asked. Rebecca sighed, looking suddenly older, the weight of generations of secrets finally lifting from her shoulders. "We let them tear it down. Bury the past once and for all. And us? The thorns?" She smiled faintly. "We live, Daniel. Free of the burden Joseph passed down to us. Free of the shadow that's hung over our family for generations." I looked back at the church one last time. In the growing light, it seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. Just stone and wooden glass, nothing more. 3 days later, I stood across the street as the demolition crew began their work, the massive machines tearing into St. Augustine's walls with mechanical efficiency. Victoria stood beside me, still not entirely believing my hastily constructed story about structural instabilities and dangerous mold. "It's a shame," she said, watching as the stained glass windows shattered under the assault. "So much history lost." "Some history belongs in the past," I replied. As the bell tower collapsed in a cloud of dust, I felt the wound on my palm, now healing cleanly, tingle one last time. Then that sensation too faded, leaving nothing but an ordinary scar to mark the end of an extraordinary legacy. The dead of St. Augustine's Church had finally found their peace. And with them, generations of thorns laid to rest as well. I turned away from the demolition site and walked toward the future, the whispers of the past silenced at last. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.